Chapter 121, Camouflage. The gray sky hung low like a tattered tarpaulin, blotting out light and hope. A bitter wind, a shrieking wraith, swept across the desolate plain and left icy kisses where it passed. Dane rubbed his rough hands over a face wind-chapped and numb with cold, trying to restore feeling. His breath puffed white in the air as his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. The plain was buried under a blinding sheet of snow that sighed and crunched under every step. Scattered boulders, crusted in frost, looked as if they wore crystalline armor, their surfaces glinting dully under the heavy sky. Here and there, dead stumps jutted up like broken gravestones, their trunks long withered, branches reduced to cracked main stems. "This damned place," Dane muttered, more helpless than angry. He turned to his adjutant, who had broken through the encirclement with him. "Any sign of our pigeons?" The adjutant dragged his weary frame forward and shook his head without speaking. His yellowish-brown beard was rimed with ice. Dane's own armor, once splendid and hard as a promise, was dented and scarred, its shine long gone. Behind him came the remnants of the Iron Hills host. Over 100 of the war goat knights had been sent out, split into 4 groups to patrol and watch for orcs riding wargs. The heavy infantry lingered silent and exhausted, some sitting, some lying, seizing whatever rest they could. They showed no complaint, but Dane knew the men's spirits were as muted as the sky, pressed down by cold and worry. Worse than morale was the lack of food. Dane had led the remnant across the frozen plain toward Lake Town for days. Their provisions were nearly gone. Without food, their strength and fighting spirit would vanish fast. If their pace faltered, the orcs would close again, and this ragged force might not make Lake Town at all. The Wargoat Knights returned time and again, each bringing bad news. More wargs sighted, the orc chase renewed. At first, Dane had been lucky. Dwarves, despite their size, had remarkable endurance and steady legs that let them march through harsh terrain faster than orcs. They'd slipped Azog's trap once and escaped. But the orcs, using wargs' keen noses, had tracked them down again. The latest force that caught up was smaller than the first, and Dane had hoped that was a mercy. They had struck back and retreated toward Lake Town, and it seemed for a moment they might be clear. Dane was not fooled for long. He understood Azog's strategy. He didn't need to overwhelm them in a single battle. He would send wave after wave of orcs to harry and exhaust the dwarves until their strength bled away. Even if Dane won each clash, the constant pursuit would wear them down until they could no longer fight. What startled him more was the direction of the pursuit. The orcs were driving them toward Lake Town rather than Mirkwood or the Lonely Mountain. To anyone else, that might have been a trap to panic into, but Dane felt an odd relief. Thorin had written, Lake Town remained under human control, and its guards had a plan. They would disguise themselves as orcs, lure the pursuers into prepared traps, and let Azog's army stumble into an ambush thinking the town was theirs. Those words had kept Dane from stabbing at his chains of fear and turning back. If he hadn't known Lake Town was friendly, he would have fought to the last, rather than be shepherded like prey. For days, Dane had tried every means to keep contact. He had released every carrier pigeon that could still fly, hoping none of Thorin's messages would be missed and that his own situation would be known at once. He had wanted to know exactly where Lake Town's reinforcements were and whether they would meet them. Food, above all, was the urgent need. If no one met them, his men would starve on the frozen plain. As Dane prepared to give the order to move on, a white pigeon appeared, dipping down to land on the adjutant's shoulder plate with a soft coo. The adjutant quickly unfastened the bamboo tube at its leg and handed it with solemn hands to Dane. Dane slit the tube, read the note, and a short, incredulous laugh burst out of him. He looked up at the bleak sky. "Tell everyone," he said, smiling for the first time in days. "This is the last retreat. We go straight to Lake Town." Many miles away, on another front, Bard was putting that plan into motion. The Long Lake Town guards moved like a different kind of army. Wrapped in old iron and animal skins, their faces hidden behind blackened helmets, wrists and necks daubed with grime and black paint. From a distance, they were nearly indistinguishable from the orcs Bolg had used to ambush the town. Stains of orc blood smeared the old armor, but on its battered surface, they only added to the authenticity. Orc gear was always filthy. and the scorch in mud made it believable. Bard himself had altered his appearance with careful roughness. The face once known for its stern nobility was obscured by a dented helmet and a mask of paint. His iron cuirass clanked as he moved. He called out sharply to the men who'd volunteered for the ruse. "Keep quiet when you meet the dwarves. Act like real orcs. No mercy in your looks." The guards, committed to the dangerous deception, nodded and tightened their grips. They would not speak when the dwarves came near. They would be the bait that, if all went well, would lead Azog's army into a snare. Chapter 122. Some intelligence, but not much. Lord, the dwarven scum have rendezvoused with the orcs led by Lord Bolg. After Dane's meeting with Bard, a warg rider who had seen the scene hurried back to report to the orc commander who was leading the pursuit. This commander wore armor that was more refined and distinctive than the others, marking him as the orc chieftain of this band. In fact, the plan to split the orcs into several pursuit teams to wear the dwarves down, using their numbers to harry and exhaust the enemy during retreat, had been his idea, not Azog's as Dane had assumed. The strategy had kept the dwarven force constantly harassed, denied proper rest and supplies, and gradually pushed them into a worse situation. When Lord Bolg met them, did he give any orders? The orc chieftain asked. At the mention of Bolg, the rider's voice changed to one of respect. Azog's name still carried weight in the army, and Bolg, as Azog's son, naturally inspired deference. The chieftain had been raised to his position through Azog's favor, and he treated Bolg with particular reverence. The warg rider replied, puzzled, "Lord Bolg's orcs met with Dane and then led that group of dwarves toward Lake Town. I exposed my position to draw attention, but Lord Bolg didn't leave any orc behind to relay orders. They didn't stop long." The chieftain frowned, thinking. Then, with the best judgment he could summon, he said, "Lord Bolg must have a plan. Since Lord Azog told me to cooperate with Bolg, we should follow his lead. I reckon Bolg intends to lure those dwarven scum into Lake Town, shut the gates and trap them there like dogs." The warg rider nodded vigorously. He didn't fully follow the reasoning, but if the chieftain, appointed by Azog, said to follow Bolg, then that was what he would do. Have the army fall into formation behind Lord Bolg, and be ready to obey his command at a moment's notice, the chieftain ordered. "Yes," the rider replied and rode off. On the other side, the Lake Town guards, led by Bard, silently urged Dane's remnants toward the town. Dane had known of Thorin's plan from the carrier pigeon, but seeing a group of riders in Orcish armor heading his way made his hand twitch toward his warhammer. His fingers tightened around the haft until his knuckles turned white. Even atop his wild boar, he muttered to himself. The riders hadn't spoken or attacked. They had only begun to withdraw the way they had come. The stench of orcs came off them in waves, raising Dane's hackles. Could this truly be a band of orcs? Then Dane noticed one of the mounted guards whose posture was awkward, as if two people were trying to move as one. The horse slowed. Under Dane's suspicious gaze, a somewhat muffled, familiar voice came from inside the armor, speaking Dwarvish. "Lord Dane, I am Feely," the voice said. From the area around the other's midsection, another voice chimed in. "And me, Killy, though I can't see anything right now. Ow! Brother, can you stop farting?" It turned out Feely and Keely were disguised by stacking themselves. Feely on top, Keely stooped below, supporting him, hence the awkward riding. Bard had noticed the warg rider earlier and had been wary of letting any disguised dwarves make contact, but when he saw the warg rider leave, he allowed Feely and Keely to approach at last. Relief washed over Dane when he saw his two juniors. A smile cracked his stern features. "Feely, Keely, is Thorin all right?" "Uncle is fine, though he's worried about you," Feely replied at once. "The trap to encage the orcs is ready inside Lake Town. If they enter, they'll die without a trace." He then relayed the intelligence Tarns had prepared in detail. A grim smile spread across Dane's face. "Perfect. My hammer has longed to taste orc blood. It's time to make them pay." Feely, more cautious, asked, "Don't your heavy infantry need rest? They've been marching without pause and are exhausted." Dane snorted and shook his head. "There will be time to rest after we annihilate those orc scum. Too many of our kin have fallen to them. Let us have our revenge with our own hands." Seeing Dane's resolve, Feely did not press the matter. After telling Dane roughly how long it would take to reach Lake Town, he clambered back into the ranks amid Keely's disgruntled muttering. Sometime later, Egon, whose eyesight was the sharpest among the watch, spotted movement beyond Lake Town. He thrust his head out of the watchtower and called down to Tarns. Tarns glanced toward the clearing that the storm soldiers had cut specifically for the orcs' approach, then smiled and looked at Bernal. "Are you ready?" Bernal grinned and ran a hand lovingly over the weapon he held. It wasn't a knight's greatsword, but a silver scepter, sculpted like a giant serpent coiled around a small planet, a terrible, elegant thing called the world-devouring scepter. "Ready to see who can kill more orcs," he answered. "Since you're generous enough to lend me this, I have to beat you at least once." Outside the walls, Dane's forces were closing in, and the trap within Lake Town waited for the moment Bolg and the orc horde would walk right into it. Chapter 123. Take a day off. Please allow me to take a day off. Lately my writing has been a little off. Not that I'm blocked, but I just can't seem to bring myself to write. That's my problem, and I appreciate your understanding. Chapter 120. Luring the orcs into a trap. After Dain led the survivors of the Iron Hills into Lake Town, Bard deliberately lingered outside the gates. He waited until he could see the dark shapes of warg riders at the far edge of the plain. Then he made a show of bouncing and waving his hands a few times before unhurriedly walking into the town. The warg riders who saw him reported the scene to their chieftain at once. The chieftain frowned and muttered, "What does this mean?" His rider rolled his eyes inwardly. The meaning was clear to him. The one disguised as a human was signaling them to come in and kill the dwarf scum. Why the chieftain hesitated, he could not understand, but he kept his counsel and looked down on his superior in his heart. "What were the guards on the watchtower wearing?" the chieftain asked. "Black armor, the same disguise Bolg used when he received the dwarves," the rider answered. He had indeed seen someone on a watchtower at the far end raise a bow, and then lower it when he realized the rider was one of them. In fact, it had been Egon. He had instinctively notched an arrow when he saw the warg rider, then remembered Tarn's and Bard's plan and held back. The rider's report was truthful enough for the chieftain. "Bolg lives up to being the master's son," the chieftain said with admiration. "In such a short time, he's taken charge of Lake Town's defenses. We'll go straight in. Bolg will open the gates for us." The rider's face split into a bloodthirsty grin. "Then the people of Lake Town," he began, licking his grime-stained lips. His wargs snorted and drooled at the thought of tearing into human flesh. "Of course," the chieftain said, a sinister smile at the corner of his mouth. "But wait until the dwarves are killed, and don't kill all the humans. The master says they still have use." Inside Lake Town, Dain had safely shepherded the remnants of his people into the town under Bard's arrangement. He wore a tired expression, but his face brightened when he saw Thorin. "Good to see you again, Thorin," he said, embracing him. "Ah, your beard is still short, and you're still as stout as ever." Thorin breathed a sigh of relief at seeing Dain more weary than wounded. He hugged him back and, smiling, said, "Likewise, Dain, you've gotten shorter and broader." Then Thorin clapped Dain on the sleeve and introduced Tarnans. "Dain, this is the friend who's helped me most on this journey, Tarnas." Dain appraised Tarnas up and down and boomed, "By the look of you, a fine warrior. If you're Thorin's friend, you're Dain's friend. Come to the Iron Hills and mention my name." Tarnas inclined his head. "I won't be a stranger then." "Don't stand on ceremony. Thorin's letters told me much of your deeds, your journeys, and how you healed Thorin's father. Your kindness to us dwarves is great. Come feast with us, roasted meat and ale, until you're full." Tarn smiled and then sobered. "First, we must win this battle." The smiles on Thorin and Dain faded into seriousness. "I saw the area you prepared for the ambush when I came in," Dain said. "Let my storm soldiers join as well. Those damned orcs have killed too many of my kin. We must have vengeance." "I thought the same," Tarns replied. "With Bard's help, we've moved the residents out of the ambush zone, but the houses and waterways remain. To stop any orcs from slipping away through the water and attacking other parts of town, assign some storm soldiers to guard the canals with Bard and Thorin." "No problem," Dain said, "but my storm soldiers aren't familiar with the waterways. I will mark them out for you. Bard said, removing his iron helmet that still smelled faintly of orcs and approaching. Dine glanced between him and Tarns and asked, "You're Bard, then?" Bard gave Tarns a brief, nervous look and said instead, "Never mind that now. The orcs are coming. Tarns, are your storm soldiers ready?" Luring the orcs into Lake Town was clever but risky. A trap could easily backfire if anything went wrong. "Don't worry, Bard," Tarnis said. "If the orcs come in, none of them will leave alive." Bard hesitated, then nodded and looked to Dane. "According to the plan, I'll lead Lake Town's guards with a portion of your storm soldiers to hold the edge of the ambush zone and prevent any escape." "Since we're making a show of it, let's make it convincing," Dane said. "My second-in-command will lead a group of storm soldiers to feign resistance, then fall back toward the trap you've set." They had barely finished arranging their men when the orc host surged forward like a black tide. The gate of Lake Town creaked harshly, and just as the chieftain had said, it began to open. "Charge in!" the orcs roared. "Kill the dwarves!" They banged their weapons on shields and howled, eyes glittering with bloodlust. The orcs poured through the open gate, thinking themselves unopposed, oblivious to the men watching them. Egon and several storm soldiers, disguised as town guards, stood with cold, unreadable faces as the horde rushed past. From windows along the ambush zone, storm soldiers peered through narrow gaps at the incoming orcs. Ballistas were being quietly centered and adjusted, their aim fixed on the unsuspecting enemy. In hidden alcoves and narrow alleys, oil-filled flamethrower devices waited, their dark nozzles giving off a faint metallic tang. Dane's second-in-command led his men in a few brief, staged skirmishes, enough to kill a handful of orcs, then fall back as if routed, drawing the attackers deeper into town. "They flee! Pursue them!" the chieftain bellowed, his mind fixed on slaughter and on winning favor with Lord Bolg. Chapter 125, Great Victory. Under the dim light of dawn, thousands of orcs poured into the streets like a collapsing flood. Their heavy boots crushed the icy cobbles, rusted blades and axes scraped along walls, and the rank breath of beasts mixed with warg drool to make the air foul. Tarns narrowed his eyes as the orcs' filthy feet crept closer across the cold ground. Dane's soldiers, having already learned every trap in the town, moved through the alleys in a few practiced motions despite their heavy plate, slipping in and vanishing like shadows. "Keep pressing," someone urged. The lead orc chieftain astride a warg roared, brandishing a serrated longsword. "Rend the dwarf scum, gnaw their bones clean." They howled at the thought of tearing the dwarves apart and into the trap Tarns had set. At the chieftain's roar came a sharp whistle. "Fire!" Tarnis's cold command echoed from the rooftop above the ambush. Death poured down like a storm. Winches on 10 ballistae along the housetops snapped at once. Arm-thick iron bolts screamed through the ranks. The warg riders in the lead fell before they could cry out, chests shattered by the bolts. Foul blood and torn organs splattered onto the faces of those behind them. One bolt drove through 3 orcs before lodging in a stone wall. The last corpse hung from it, suspended like a grotesque banner. Many never comprehended what had hit them, eyes wide with shock and disbelief as they died on the spot. Survivors were hurled backward by the force, arcing through the air like broken kites before landing with agonized wails, black blood steaming from open wounds. Their screams rolled through Lake Town. "It's a trap! Fall back! Fall back!" An orc rider who realized the truth wheeled his warg and bellowed, his cry cut off when an iron bolt grazed his ear and took half his skull. The warg, panic-struck, crashed into a pile of barrels and brought him down. Escape was gone. The gate of Lake Town slammed shut at the command of storm soldiers, iron chains clanging like a death knell. Orcs near the gate could see only the sudden cries from the streets ahead and the charge stalling. Those behind wanted to push on, but the front rank, trapped in the ambush, scrambled to get free. The short-tempered even struck at comrades who blocked them. Chaos and cruelty ruled them, bullying the weak, fleeing the strong. The chieftain realized he'd been baited, and fear crept into his one remaining eye. Was Lord Bolg dead? Had someone worn his colors to lure them in? Whoever had killed Bolg could kill him. He tried to salvage the situation. If he could get a message out to Azog, perhaps he would survive, even maimed. The gate was heavy wood, not iron. He could break it. "Retreat," he shouted hoarsely. Get to the walls. Smash the gate. A cold, out-of-place laugh answered him. Bernal lounged at the town gate. The world-devouring scepter rested on the ground beside him, its serpent eyes glowing an ominous red. I thought Tarns and I would see who could kill the most, he said, kicking an orc that lunged at him. The orc sagged as if sucked of life. Its limbs went slack and breathing faltered. Those around it went weak too. Bernal's scepter drank at them, an attached battle skill that pulled enemies in and leached their stamina. A second whistle cut the air. On the walls and from the hidden houses, Egon and Tarns heard it and shouted as one, "Light the fires!" Bernal slammed the scepter down. The silver serpent on its head opened crimson eyes. Cleverly concealed flamethrower devices along the narrow streets flared to life one after another. With a single whoosh, torrents of flame, like awakened fire dragons, spouted from nozzles, forming pillars of fire as wide as 2 men. They roared through the main street, scorching the ground to black and raising the air to a shimmering, suffocating heat. The inferno licked armor and beast hide, searing flesh and turning the orcs into blazing torches. Screams filled the smoke as men and beasts writhed and burned. The flames clung like a curse, impossible to douse quickly. Many orcs were reduced to charred husks in minutes. An orc lunged for the canal, but Dane's adjutant burst from the water, warhammer swinging. The hammer smashed into the orc's chest. "For the Iron Hills!" Dane roared from behind the wall of flame. Dwarf warriors poured from houses with hammers and axes gleaming in the firelight. They focused on kneecaps and tendons, bringing the tall monsters down to crush windpipes with hammerheads. A one-armed veteran laughed as he clung to the chieftain's warg, driving a dagger into the beast's belly while its teeth tore his shoulder. They died together. Tarns' Storm Legion moved like reapers. 5 storm knights, wrapped in their tempests, cut through orcs wherever they passed. 100 storm soldiers formed a triangular vanguard, barbed hook-sickle spears severing hamstrings and shields, shoving enemies into the roaring flames. Their silver armor darkened with blood, but not one gave ground. They rescued dwarves in peril. One storm soldier parried an orc's blade and cut another down, saving a fallen dwarf who only nodded a quick thanks before seizing his axe and charging back in. The dying chieftain, one eye fixed on Tarns, tried to tear out an iron bolt and staggered toward a flamethrower to smash it. A dark figure dropped from a roof. Thorin, leaping with Philly's longsword in his grip. The blade drove through the chieftain's neck and out its throat. "The blood debt of Iron Hills will be repaid," Thorin hissed as he twisted the hilt. The chieftain's neck snapped with a sickening crack and it collapsed. Screams of routed orcs carried from the burning streets to the canals. 3 charred figures smashed through a wooden wall and flung themselves into Lake Town's latticed waterways. The icy water soaked their armor, but they kept swimming toward a cluster of decrepit fishing boats, their only hope. They did not know the mass shadows were already bristling with killing intent. "Fire!" Bard's hoarse voice cut through mist. Kneeling in a boat, he let his bow sing. An iron-tipped arrow buried itself in the lead orc's right eye. It twitched and sank, its dark blood smearing the ice. The other 2 dove, bubbles marked their path. Lake Town's guards knew these waters. Generations of fishermen had trailed nets heavier and craftier than orcs. Bard whipped out a harpoon. "Cast the nets!" A scatter of fishing boats sent out hemp nets soaked in tung oil. Underwater, orc ankles snagged. Struggling to surface, they met Bard's harpoons. One spear punched clean through a throat and pinned the orc to the net. Another orc tried to cut the rope, but a harpoon buried from above burst through its back, the point appearing between ribs with lung wrapped around it. "One left," Bard murmured, eyes narrowing toward the northwest bridge arch, where splintering wood whispered. A hidden orc clambered up the bridge pier but slipped on moss, falling repeatedly until it reached the edge. It met 20 hunting bows. "The waterways of Lake Town," Bard said coldly as he knocked, "are not a highway. Even ghosts can't swim out." A rain of arrows drove the orc back into the river. It struggled beneath the surface. Then a hooked pole from a fisherman skewered its shoulder blade and hauled it up like a dying fish. The guards looped a rope around its neck, tossed the other end over a mast, and Bard stepped on its twisting face. The rope went taut. The crisp snap of cervical spine echoed across the boat. They cleaned bloody nets in silence. Bard watched the water calm, The burning town was reflected like a double purgatory, but its ripples reached nowhere. As the flames died, the real slaughter began. Surviving orcs huddled in corners and were dragged out one by one. Dane picked up a trembling scout, pressed his warhammer to its forehead, and dropped it. Skull shattered, blood spattered his mottled breastplate. The dwarves executed without shouting or taunting, only the dull thud of iron on bone and the soft whimper of ember-laden wind. Streets were littered with bodies, some pierced by bolts, some charred, others dismembered. Burning bonfires crackled across the town. Wooden houses burned red and warped, ready to collapse. The odor of scorched flesh hung thick. Under Tarns's command, 5 storm knights and hundreds of storm soldiers, with Bernal among them, began to clear the field. Bernal, who had handled Bolg's men before, moved with grim efficiency. Laketown's position by the lake made disposal simple enough. Heaped bodies were tossed into the water and left to the fish. When the last orc was thrown in, Tarns approached Dane. The dwarf king knelt over a fallen comrade, shutting the dead man's single eye with a blood-streaked finger. Casualties there were fewer than in many ambushes, but each loss cut deep. Tarns spoke softly. "Your soldiers fought like bedrock." Dane did not look up. He drove his warhammer into the earth and answered, a shadow of mourning in his voice. "No, they should have stood eternal as the mountains." Ripples spread as the corpses sank. Bard, watching smoke-stained brick and burned roofs, let out a short laugh. "At least I won't worry about cleaning out the old residents. Everything's burned clean." Thorin snorted. "As allies, you gave us a battlefield. The dwarves will help rebuild. The Durin house keeps its promises." Bard's smile unfolded. He had been waiting to hear that. A light rain began to fall, washing ash and soot into gutters. The fires went out, and only the soft rustle of charred wood remained as Laketown started slowly to breathe again. Cold wind and drizzle swept over the charred rooftops of Laketown, carrying ash and the tang of blood as it eddied into the sky. The orc army had been routed. Tarns, Thorin, Bard, and Dane stood among the ruins, staring at the ruined ambush site, each lost in his own thoughts. Bard stood by the docks, brow furrowed, fingers dug into his brass belt buckle as he watched houses still smoldering. Behind him, Long Lake Town guards shepherded the last of the women and children, wrapped in blankets, toward the tents set up as temporary shelters. Wooden barrels of hot fish soup steamed in the cold air. Bard drew a long breath, turned, and began issuing orders to the nearest guards. "Clear these ruins as fast as you can. Assess the damage. Provide shelter for anyone whose home has burned." Thorin had promised to rebuild, but for now the homeless needed a warm place to sleep. The guards sprang into action and began organizing people for cleanup. Tarns, Thorin, and Dane exchanged looks, then sent their soldiers, who had just been dragging orc corpses into the lake, to help. After a while, a breathless guard ran up to report, "Bard, at least 30 families have nowhere to stay for the winter." Bard closed his eyes for a moment, then turned to watch the storm soldiers moving stones. The warriors of the Golden Tree worked like machines. A handful of them could lift half a collapsed wall with their bare hands. Tarns came up beside him, the edge of his cloak still stained with orc blood. "If you want, Bard," he said, "I can have the storm soldiers build wooden houses through the night." Bard shook his head. He let his gaze travel over one storm soldier's shoulder armor, where an orc's desperate strike had left a jagged hole. "Your soldiers aren't carpenters," he said. "They belong on the battlefield. I don't want them wasting stamina if another orc army comes." Bard had seen the storm soldiers fight. They were undoubtedly the finest he had ever witnessed, disciplined, deadly, and single-minded in pursuit of victory. Only the elves of Mirkwood, under their proud king, might compare. Tarns thought, not without amusement, that Bard underestimated how far his soldiers could be pushed. The fight they just had was at most a warm-up. Still, the orcs had been weak, and with their chieftain slain by Thorin and the ambush bolstered by ballistae and flame-throwing devices, the victory had demanded less from the storm soldiers than it might have. "Don't worry about my men," Tarnas pressed. "With their help, your speed clearing and rebuilding could at least triple." A flurry of other names, Kenneth Haight, Edgar, Nefeli Lukes, crossed Tarnas's mind, all asking for men. He blinked at Bard and thought the human and excellent leader. Laketown was under the double threat of orcs and Smaug. My home is large, Tarns thought, and if they tire, they can sleep there without trouble. He was about to offer a way to get Lake Town's folk to his territory quickly when Dane's loud, rough laugh cut through the air. The dwarf kicked aside an orc helm as he came up with a waterskin slung over his shoulder. "If you ask me," he boomed, "you should move to River Valley Town." "River Valley Town?" Bard frowned. Thorin, strolling out from behind Dane, shook his head. That pile of ruined stone? Smaug flattened it over 100 years ago. Dane sloshed water across his red beard and laughed. "You've got it wrong, Thorin. Smaug wasn't keen on crushing every house. He broke their defenses and left. Dwarves from the Iron Hills have seen River Valley Town from a distance. Most of the houses remain, and the city walls were built by our hands. You don't think our craftsmanship crumbles in a century?" "Of course not," Thorin grunted. Dane set down his waterskin. "There you go. Human, what do you say? River Valley needs cleanup, but it's better than your people living in flimsy tents through winter." Bard's hand trembled. He knew River Valley Town. One time it had been the place from which his ancestor Durin fired the Black Arrow, and where he and his people had been devastated by Smaug. The memories rose up, his dying father confiding a true identity and the courage of their ancestors, his mother humming songs about that town on her sickbed. The thought of returning stirred complicated feelings, but he kept his face steady. "The walls may be sound, but there's no fishing ground there, only cold, barren land. The orcs are targeting Lake Town. Moving inland will only make my people more conspicuous." Dane scoffed. "So you think drafty Lake Town is better? Or do these stacked wooden planks stand a chance against dragonfire?" Tarns patted Bard's shoulder. "What Dane says isn't wrong." He drew a quick map in the scorched earth with a charcoal stick. River Valley Town sits against a shoulder of the Lonely Mountain. Below the eastern cliff, a tributary runs to the lake. If those pass walls are repaired, with my storm soldiers' help, the defenses will be 10 times stronger than here. He tossed the charcoal aside. "Lake Town's defenses are thin. This time you killed many orcs with traps. Next time, Azog will know he can't take Lake Town easily and will retaliate. I don't believe Lake Town can stand against a large orc host." Thorin added, "Azog won't be content with the Lonely Mountain alone. He wants the north. If we are destroyed, Lake Town will be next." Bard sighed. "We lost houses, but no lives. Even if I agree to move people to River Valley, I must consult them. This is their home. They have the right to decide." Dane shrugged. "Fine, but don't think Azog won't consider the same. I hope the River Valley ruins are only weeds and brush when he gets there, not orcs." As Tarns prepared to discuss logistics, Thorin pulled Dane aside. Dane asked what the secrecy was about. Then Thorin quietly asked whether he had sent for aid to his father, Thrain. Dane admitted he had. His face fell as he realized the danger he might have called down. Their kinsmen in the Iron Hills were besieged by orcs, and Thrain, upon receiving Dane's plea, would surely march and could be ambushed in the Misty Mountains. Dane slammed his fist on a wooden barrel, splinters flying. "Damn it! I should have thought of this. Thrain will rush to help, and Azog will be waiting." He stood frozen, ashamed to meet Thorin's eyes. Thorin only sighed. "I can only hope my father is all right." At that moment, Gandalf appeared at the end of the street, gray robes stirring, followed by a small hobbit peeking around a corner to watch a storm soldier split an orc skull with a lightning-wreathed blade. Gandalf hurried over with a comforting smile. "Dane, don't worry. I've spoken with the great Eagle King. He and his eagles will watch the valley from the clouds. They're searching for Thrain's army in the Misty Mountains." Dane paused 2 seconds, then let out a loud laugh and clapped Gandalf in a bear hug that made the wizard wince as iron met robe. "Oh, Gandalf, Thorin mentioned you in his letter. No wonder. I should have known you old fox had a plan." Gandalf untangled himself and saw Bard approaching. He nodded to him. "Bard, I came looking for you. Azog will retaliate. The wooden houses of Lake Town can't stand up to orcs." Bard managed a bitter smile. "Are you here to persuade me to move to River Valley Town too?" "Two?" Gandalf blinked, and Bard pointed at Tarns, and then at Thorin and Dane. Tarns briefly explained his assessment. Gandalf agreed. "Most Lake Town houses are wood and lack stout walls. If Smaug flies again, the damage would be catastrophic. River Valley's houses are of stone and tile, many built with dwarven help. Even after a century, they hold. They can withstand fire better, and with tall, thick walls, can resist an orc army until reinforcements arrive. Bard inhaled the cold lake air. "You're right," he said finally, "but I must ask the people. They must help decide." Gandalf studied him and sensed a reluctance Bard wouldn't voice. Noticing Bard's fixed gaze across the misty lake toward the black silhouette of the lonely mountain and river valley town, memories pressed at him. His father's last words, the courage of ancestors, his mother's lullabies, all things of the past. Bard steadied himself. "Do not worry, I will see to my people's safety. For now, let the living have a hot meal. The dwarves from the Iron Hills have been chased and fought hard. They need to replenish themselves." He let out a long breath. "We won a great victory today. There will be a feast tonight to celebrate and to give me a chance to ask the townsfolk about relocating to River Valley. It will also welcome Dane and the Iron Hills dwarves. Don't expect much variety. Lake Town's pantry is mostly fish." Dane's eyes sparkled. "We dwarves don't care for fine fare. So long as there's ale, we're happy." Bard looked uncertain. "I hope the former mayor's cellar has enough." "Tonight's patrols and defense will be my soldier's duty," Tarn said. Bard blinked. "You're not coming to the feast?" Tarn shook his head and smiled in a way that was almost grim. He would reward his men, he said. Having routed so many orcs, his soul collector had taken in many souls. He intended to return quickly through the teleportation gate to summon reinforcements. With that, he gestured reassurance and prepared to leave, trusting Bard to hold the town for the night. Chapter 127, Olog High Trolls. A week later, north of the Misty Mountains, the allied army of the Blue Mountains dwarves marched in proud procession. Thrain stood on a ridge, his steel war boots crushing the crusted snow beneath him. Behind him, the banners of the allied hosts whipped in the cold wind like streaks of crimson fire. Though the dwarves had been grievously weakened after Azog a century past, Durin's line had answered the call, gathering once more under Thrain's summons. Light infantry moved nimbly at the front, clad in light chain and gleaming silver scale, short-handled axes and round shields clanking at their waists. Behind them, the heavy infantry formed a moving phalanx, plate-armored veterans wielding massive battle axes and long-handled hammers. The upper portions of some war hammers and axe hafts were wrapped in oiled linen. They could be ignited and thrown to make ad hoc walls of flame. 800 war-goat knights escorted Thrain. The goats, like those of Dane's Iron Hills, bore sharp horns and heavy iron barding. The dwarven riders sang boisterous war songs in their own tongue, voices braided with the dull thud of hooves on stone into something like a single ferocious chorus. Chariots rolled at the center, bronze-bound wheels studded with protruding spears, and archers rode atop them, ready to unleash volleys at a moment's notice. Each chariot was drawn by 6 war goats, and the wheels grinding on mountain rock sounded like some great beast gnashing its teeth. The siege corps brought up the rear with detachable catapults and ballistae, the very engines Thrain had prepared for the lonely mountain's thick gates and rock walls. Thrain watched his gathered hosts with a rising tide of feeling. He raised his warhammer. Cold light flashed off the blade and pierced the mist. He bellowed, "Let Azog see. The fury of Durin's blood has not been quenched." The dwarves struck their shields with hammers in answer. Their voices shook the frozen air. At dawn the following day, a wounded carrier pigeon staggered into Thrain's camp, its right wing shredded by an orc arrow. It dropped beside his fire, blood seeping from its beak and staining the parchment in its claw. Thrain cut the string with the haft of his hammer. A dark bead of blood slid down the blade and made a red pit in the snow. Other lords hurried in as Thrain read. His healed eyes were tired in the firelight. His iron gauntlet crushed a tin cup as he spoke the letter's words aloud. Dine is trapped in Lake Town. Azog's bastards ambushed him and are at his heels. A hot-tempered lord snatched up his hammer, his red beard bristling with fury. If a single drop of Dine's blood is spilled, we'll drown these orcs in blood. Another, a veteran of Azog, spat, "Dine wounded is a stain on Durin's house. Let those orc bastards taste true dwarven wrath." Voices rose and clashed. Some cried to move faster, others to abandon baggage and charge. Men threatened to feed their beards to wargs if held back a day more. In the commotion, Thrain strode into the bonfire's glow, stamping on the logs with his war boots. "Order!" he roared. "Light infantry, shed what armor slows you. Heavy infantry, cast off shields when necessary. War goats, double sulfur beans. Reach the pass before sundown. Anyone who slows a half step, I'll hammer them into wrought copper myself," cut in the red-bearded lord. "Enough!" A cooler voice rose above the clamor. A calm lord brought his axe down, the strike on his shield silencing the bickering. He stepped to Thryne's side, laying a hand on his pauldrons. "Steady, Thryne. Trust Dine. Molten iron of our forebears runs in his veins, not orc filth. We must not be hasty. Ordering our men to cast away armor is Azog's tactic. If Dine can be trapped, so can we." Thryne's anger ebbed, replaced by shame. "You're right, brother. I feared they'd capture Dine and make him suffer as they did me. I let my rage rule me." The hot-tempered lord, still dissatisfied, demanded action. Thryne considered, then gave a firm command. "We cannot abandon chariots, ballistae, and catapults. They will be needed at the Lonely Mountain. The pass terrain will slow our march. To relieve Dine quickly, we'll send the war goat knights. Their mounts are least hindered by the rocks. You, lead them by the shortcut to Lake Town at once." The pointed lord saluted, lifting Thryne's token, and strode off to marshal the knights. Thryne watched him go, then stared toward the mist-cloaked gap in the mountains. "We move too. Watch for Azog's traps. Let that orc scum learn the dwarves' war song Tears Scalps." Some days earlier, Azog had hunched over a map of the Misty Mountains, his iron hook rasping the parchment and punching a hole in the pass. "When Thryne answers Dine's cry, his army will rush here like rutting goats," he snarled. "I want their blood to soak the sand." Deep in the caves were 30 Ologhai, trolls of Sauron's making. Their skin looked as if scorched by sulfur. Iron plates were riveted into the gray-black folds. These monsters, about 15 feet tall and bred for war, were Azog's grand gift for slaying dwarves. He had also gathered many ordinary trolls to use elsewhere. Trolls do not tolerate sunlight. Exposure turns them to stone, but the Misty Mountains' perpetual mists kept the ground dark and safe. The Ologhai lay chained in caves flanking the pass, while orc archers hunkered in higher ledges, their arrowheads laced with a slow-working venom that festered and drained a man's spirit for days. When the first wisps of mist crept over the gap, the orcs branded the trolls' lids with hot iron. The trolls woke screaming, armor clanging like hell's bells. Orcs spat black speech at them. "The sun is your death. Here you are, death." Azog had also slipped into the underground goblin halls on the far side of the mountains. The goblin king lay dead beneath his throne, an arrow in his skull and terror frozen on his face. Azog plucked the crushed crown with the tip of his hook and lowered his voice so the echoes would carry. "Your king died like a smashed slug," he told the gathered goblins. The murderer, Thorin Oakenshield, laughs now with his kin. Huddled thousands blinked in the gloom, eyes like frightened fireflies. A guard, desperate, pointed beneath the throne and muttered that a human sorcerer had sealed the exit. Tarniz, the wizard who had cost Azog his warg riders. Azog's hook plunged into the guard's shoulder to make example of him. Then he strode to the throne, feigning grief, and stirred the ravings of the simple creatures. "Sharpen your poisoned arrows and come to the Lonely Mountain. We will pull dwarven beards from their faces and stuff them into their throats." The goblins fell upon his words like a tide. Rusty knives, short bows, and fetid salvia dripped from fangs as the horde surged off, bound for Ravenhill and River Valley Town to seize every crevice. Back at the pass, Thryne's army pressed into the fog and paid for every yard. Orc archers poured poison into their ranks from unseen ledges. The venom made men cry out and rot from within. Dwarves at the vanguard, torch-bearing, marched into the smoke and flung burning oil into the rock clefts. The wounded, refusing to yield, used their dying strength to charge the hiding places. Amid the stench of scorched flesh, the heavy infantry stepped over fallen comrades and drove into the crannies where the orcs cowered, skewering them like meat. "Crossbow volley, clear the cliff tops!" Thryne shouted, axe pointed to the sky. Flames partially burned the mist away and revealed the ledges, orc archers perched like vermin. 30 crossbows answered at once, not with ordinary quarrels, but with iron net cables wrapped in pitch. They flew up and unfurled into burning snares, turning the cliff faces into plumes of flame. Orcs toppled from their perches in balls of fire. Thryne's axe split a third skull as dwarven battle cries rose in triumph. Torches and oil drew crimson arcs across the mist. The heavy shield wall drove forward like an anvil. Chariots crashed through the lines, ramming and crushing, their spear-studded wheels grinding orc bodies into the road. For a time, victory seemed at hand. Then the earth itself roared. When the first Ologhai punched through the veil, dwarves thought the mountain had come down. A black iron giant swung a club that cleared the front line like chaff. Plate armor proved paper beneath such force. One dwarf remained wedged in his shield as his legs were trampled into pulp. Trolls. Men screamed as normal-sized trolls burst from other caves, clubs smashing, bodies hulking over the stones. The dwarves' courage did not falter, but the signal for a new, terrible phase of battle had sounded, one that would test the mettle of Durin's kin to the edge. Chapter 128. Big Eagle. Chariots, rally! Aim for the troll's knees! No sooner had Thryne roared the command than the war goat he rode reared, narrowly avoiding a club that an Ologhai troll brought down. 2 chariots flanked the giant, their archers losing bolt after bolt, while the chariot's iron-ramming horns smashed into the troll's left leg. The giant's thick black iron knee guard only sparked. It staggered a few paces. Then the rams twisted and sheared off, and the chariots themselves rolled, breaking apart under the recoil. The trolls stomped, and the screams of drivers and archers burst out with the sound of splintering wood. "Switch to chain maces! Entangle it!" A dwarf lord shoved his heavy infantry forward. 20 iron chains flew like a spiderweb and wrapped the Ologhai's limbs, and the dwarves lashed the chains to the ruined chariots. The goat strained to drag the machine down, but the troll only grinned, yanked the chains, and flung both chariots and goats into the cliff face, where they exploded into splinters and blood. Another Ologhai, clutching a monstrous stone hammer, smashed through the dwarven front line and came for Thryne. The hammer crashed onto the heavy infantry shields. They shattered under the blow, and the men behind were sent flying. Thryne watched his kin fall, eyes red with fury. He raised his battle axe to charge, but other dwarf lords held him back. Then part of the light infantry returned from the contested front. They hurled oil pots that shattered against the troll's iron plates, black grease running into the gaps of helmet and mail. Torches followed, and flame leapt into those gaps like a living thing. Beneath the armor, the troll's gray-black skin blistered and charred. A rank, greasy stench fed the fire. The 2 Ologhai threw back their heads in a deafening wail and beat at the flames, trying to tear off the red-hot iron that now clung to them. When their hands touched the burning metal, they screamed even louder as flesh sizzled. Driven half-mad by pain, the trolls flailed their clubs wildly. The light infantry kept pelting them with oil and torches so the fire would not die. Helmets began to melt. Molten iron fused over eyes, and blue-green pus splattered as charred eyeballs burst. Agony robbed the trolls of control. They dropped to their knees. The heavy infantry rushed in and thrust long spears into exposed gaps, into heads, throats, soft joints, and finally felled them. But the victory was only partial. From other caves, a 3rd and 4th Ologhai broke loose, followed by common trolls and a new wave of orcs. Their aim was not Thryne, but the catapults and ballistas in the rear, those war machines that had been slaughtering the attackers by the score. A troll's hammer shattered a catapult base. The counterweight stone crashed down and buried 2 men who could not leap clear. Other engines tried to move, but the troll's long strides outpaced them, and soon another catapult was smashed. The ballistas fared no better. If the Wargoat Knights had still been available to screen the engines with their mobility, the rear might have held. But they had all been sent to support Dane. Without that protection, the line began to wobble. A dwarf lord was bashed into the rock, legs twitching. Then the hastily held defense unraveled. Orcs poured through, numbers and ferocity overwhelming the desperately improvised formation. "Orderly retreat! Contract the line!" Thryne's voice was harsh with command. Survivors scrambled back, leaving bloody streaks in the snow. The orcs and trolls did not press immediately. Common trolls amused themselves by picking up wounded dwarves and hurling them high, enjoying the dull thud as bone and meat hit stone. Thryne's axe, its blade nicked 3 times, dripped black orc blood as he ground his teeth. "Damn Azog!" A distant horn echoed from within the Misty Mountains. The orcs and trolls paused at the sound. When several massive Ologhai advanced and the horn sounded again, the attackers resumed their push, and then a second sound cut through the fog, keener and higher, an eagle cry that cracked the clouds like a blade. Thrain looked up. First, one great eagle broke through the mist, its wings vast enough to blot half the sky. At its sight, the bird flapped, and the wind it raised rent the fog to shreds, revealing 12 more enormous eagles behind it and letting shafts of sunlight pierce the gloom. One sudden ray struck several common trolls. They shrieked and froze, stones spreading over them like a living armor. The lead eagle cried, and 3 others wheeled to its flanks, beating the air to whip up a gale that drove the haze away from the dwarves. Light fell on blood-streaked armor and mud, glittering like scattered coins. On the field, the trolls panicked. Unaccustomed to sun, they shoved aside orcs and fled for the caves. Even the Ologhai, brutal and altered as they were, reared and howled when the sunlight touched them. Some threw off their riders, crushed the orcs beneath foot in blind terror, and scrambled back into shadow. The great eagles had already fixed their eyes on the Ologhai. They folded their wings and plunged like living spears. One eagle's hooked talons closed on a troll's neck, its cry choked into a gurgle. The eagle rose, tearing flesh and vertebrae from the beast, black blood raining down onto the upturned faces of dwarf soldiers. Another eagle drove its beak through an ear, and brains spattered from the other socket. Others ripped open chest plates and plucked out beating hearts. The Ologhai tried to swing clubs in retaliation, but the eagles twisted and darted with inhuman agility. Thrain, after a beat of stunned relief, laughed and shouted, "The great eagles are here. Our allies have come. Work with the eagles. Drive the brains from these orcs and trolls." The dwarves rallied. They snaked iron chains into the distracted trolls' legs and lashed spears at exposed Achilles tendons. With the eagles harrying the giants, the chariots, catapults, and ballistas were able to fire freely once more, raining death on the fleeing hordes. For half an hour, the battlefield became a terrible harmony of slaughter in air and on ground. Then the orcs too began to break and run. The last living Ologhai tried to dive into a cave but was circled by 3 eagles. Like predators toying with prey, they took turns, talons tearing open a shoulder, a beak pulverizing a knee, finally crushing the skull. The surviving orcs melted away, dropping arms and armor and burrowing into fissures. Now and then, an unlucky one was plucked out by a circling eagle and flung high, a brief, clean end. The lead eagle made a few lazy circles and then landed near Thrain. The great bird lowered its head so they could meet. Thrain stepped forward, bowed slightly, and said, "I, Thrain son of Thror, king of Durin's folk, thank you for your aid." The great eagle made no sound, but watched him with golden eyes that reflected the dwarf king's blood-stained cloak. After a long look, having confirmed that this was the dwarf Gandalf had spoken of, it stirred a glittering gust of snow, spread its wings, and lifted, calling to its kin. The flock answered and rose, shrieking, then swept back into the thinning mist and vanished as swiftly as they had come. Chapter 129, Woodland Kingdom. Thrain's boot ground against a charred orc arm as he looked up to watch the great eagles wheel away. Only when their wings had faded into the distance did he notice a small stone turned aside at his feet and a yellowed envelope tucked beneath it. He walked over, picked it up. The envelope was stained with ice shards and black orc blood. On the flap, Gandalf's distinctive rune was scrawled in haste. Thrain smiled, despite himself. The handwriting inside was hurried and messy, but legible. He read, "Thrain, if you are reading this, the great eagles have finally found you. I know of Dain's situation, but do not let anger blind you. I, along with Tarns, Lord of the Golden Tree, and Bard, Master of Laketown, have mustered forces to aid Dain. You need not worry unduly." Bolg, son of Azog, tried to seize Laketown, but Tarns's blade ended him. Under the protection of men and the Golden Tree, Dain will be safer than the ale in your cellar. Hold your ground, Thrain. The glory of Durin is measured in wisdom, not recklessness. The main force of the Golden Tree marches now toward the Lonely Mountain. Lead your men and rendezvous with us. Gandalf Thrain let out a long breath and felt some of his tension ease. He didn't need the letter to tell him the eagle's appearance had been Gandalf's doing. He chuckled aloud. "I owe Gandalf a great debt," he muttered, "and Tarns another." Tarns, though we've never met. Once Azog is dead, I'll send him a cart of the finest dwarven liquor, enough to turn his golden tree into a drunken one. He remembered, too, how quickly his own wounds had healed thanks to the miraculous curatives of the Golden Tree territory. That was another reason for gratitude. He folded the letter and turned to the gathered dwarf lords. Brothers, hear this. Dain will be safe in Lake Town. Reinforcements from the Golden Tree are on their way. We must press on and meet them. Together we will face Azog's host. He looked to his personal guard. Forget the fleeing orcs. Reform the ranks. Count the dead and wounded. Tally our losses. The mist was broken by the eagles, but we must stay vigilant. Send out more scouts. Azog may lie in wait further down the road. Yes, the captain bowed and set the men to it. The surviving dwarves took up the tasks. Heavy infantry banged shields with war hammers to set rhythm and order. Lighter troops scaled rocks to recover unbroken arrows. Ruined chariots were dragged into makeshift barricades. The air filled with the acrid scent of burned fat and blood, punctuated by the groans of the wounded. The other lords rode off to inspect their contingents. Only one stayed behind, the same lord who had earlier counseled calm. Thrain noticed the thoughtful look on his face. "What are you thinking, my brother?" he asked. The lord started, then spoke carefully. "What I'm about to say may anger you, Thrain. I was wondering if we might enlist the elves of the woodland realm in the matter of the Lonely Mountain." At the word elves, Thrain's brows tightened and a flash of disgust crossed his face. It vanished almost as quickly, replaced by a measured nod. "Go on." The lord blinked in surprise, had expected curses and scorn, and hurried on. "If the elves would hold the western slopes of the Lonely Mountain, we could mass our strength for a direct assault on the main gate. The Sylvan elves' skill in woodland warfare is no secret. If they press from Mirkwood, Azog will be forced to spread his forces thin." Thrain considered a long moment. "After we cross the Misty Mountains, I will send an envoy to the woodland realm, but I cannot promise they will answer our call." "I will go," the lord offered quickly. "I will serve as envoy and speak with their king." Thrain nodded. "Good. Do that. And if those elf brats become proud and refuse, you return at once." Sunlight sifted through Mirkwood's canopy, dappling the forest floor as Legolas moved with the light, sure-footed and silent. He came to his father's hall and halted 10 paces from the antlered throne. Thranduil lay reclined, as always, one hand supporting his cheek, the other casually touching the golden pendant at his breast. The golden dewdrop Tarns had given him. The pendant's coolness had soothed a long-standing burn. The dragonfire scars that had marred the king's face were now much diminished. Freed of the need to hide his features with magic, Thranduil had recently resumed hosting banquets. At Legolas's approach, the king's lashes fluttered and the faintest smile touched his mouth. He didn't need to open his eyes to know who stood before him. "Father!" Legolas dipped his head in a simple gesture, foregoing elaborate court ceremony. Mud clung to his boots and a wispy bit of web hung from his cloak, evidence of a patrol just ended. Thranduil opened his eyes fully now, the smile gone, his expression those of the imperious Elven King. "The moonlight has not yet reached Mirkwood's canopy, Legolas," Thranduil said dryly. "The harps are not yet tuned, and you have already struck up a reckless prelude." Legolas bristled. "The dwarven host from the Iron Hills with men of Lake Town cut the orc pursuers to pieces. Azog's men were flung into the icy waters like fish bait. Men and dwarves now prepare a counterattack on the Lonely Mountain. And you—" He glanced at the attendants weaving winter berries and moonlight roses into banquet arches, then continued, "You let your people drown themselves in feasting and even divert border patrols to haul barrels of wine." Thranduil propped his elbow and regarded his son calmly. "You like to bring the scent of gunpowder into my halls, child. Lake Town is near Mirkwood, yet not so near. Whence comes this intelligence?" "Toriel," Legolas said. "Her group was tracking the larger spiders outside our borders. They heard commotion from Lake Town, went to see, and saw men and dwarves fighting orcs together." Thranduil's face tightened at the name. He rose from his throne, paced the few paces to Legolas, and lifted an idle hand to straighten the prince's shoulder armor before stepping back. "Toriel ought to be managing the spiders and clearing their nests, not being distracted by foreign quarrels. You spend too much time with a lowly sylvan elf." Legolas's expression turned to bafflement. He didn't understand his father's impatience with Toriel. He pressed, "Father, the orcs to the north are the real threat, not spiders." Thranduil chuckled, cool as running water on a stone. "Orcs will never break Mirkwood's lines. They did not in the past. They will not in the future." A clear voice replied from just behind Legolas. "What if they go elsewhere? Like the big spiders. They stop swarming here and go outward. What if they go to Lake Town?" Toriel stepped forward and bowed to the king. "My patrols have found the spiders thinning, and a war has broken out at Lake Town between men, dwarves, and orcs. I believe I must learn what transpired at the Lonely Mountain." Thranduil's response stunned both Legolas and Toriel. "Other places are not my concern," he said smoothly. "Mirkwood will endure through the turning of the world. Let dwarves fight and gnaw among their stones for their own gains. Elven arrows should not sing for another people's quarrels." Toriel listened, then bowed again, preparing to leave. Legolas stepped forward. "What of the man who gave you the pendant?" he asked, pointing to Tarnas's gift. Thranduil's eyes flicked to the pendant. "Tarnas," he said mildly. "With his strength he will not fall if dwarves perish. I trust him." Legolas gave Toriel a look, and she added, "Tarns did not stand alone. When the orcs came to Lake Town, he led about 1,000 men from the Golden Tree to aid the townsfolk and the dwarves of the Iron Hills." "Tarns leads men into battle?" Legolas said. "You accepted his gift, father. If he asks for help, can we simply do nothing? Would that not make us ungrateful like those dwarves?" "Do not compare elves to dwarves," Thranduil snapped for the first time, then softened when he saw it was his son he addressed. Outside, the sound of harpists tuning drifted through the hall as preparations for the feast began. Thranduil smoothed his robes, took his seat, and with an elegant shrug, said, "If Tarnas requires the Woodland Realm's aid, I will grant it. Now, Legolas, select the brooch for tonight. The green crystal one will brighten your complexion. Toriel, after you have rested, continue your patrol." Though he closed his eyes again as if to rest, Thranduil's breath came quicker than before. The matter had clearly stirred him. Legolas signaled to Toriel to leave with him, but Toriel stayed a moment longer, respectful and urgent. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "besides the spider reports, my patrol found another. Far to the south of Mirkwood, countless goblins move through the forest. They come from the underground halls beneath the Misty Mountains. They are heading toward the Lonely Mountain." Without waiting for further reply, she turned and left with Legolas. Only after their footsteps faded did Thranduil open his eyes fully, his brow drawn tight in thought. Chapter 130. At this time, Radon is still on his way. The goblins' movements could not be hidden from Tarnas, Thorin, and Dane in Lake Town, or more precisely, from the scouts Dane had sent out. The scouts reported that goblins were suddenly sweeping down from Mirkwood toward the old site of River Valley Town. As the celebratory banquet for the defeat of the orcs wound down in Lake Town, Bard asked the townspeople to wait. He had something important to explain. Under curious, puzzled gazes, he told them what Lake Town might soon face, and urged them to follow him back to the ruins of River Valley Town to rebuild the old city. "I won't force any of you," he said. "I won't expel you the way the previous mayor drove you from your homes. If you don't want to go, I will personally ask King Thranduil of the Woodland Realm to accept you. For those who choose to follow me, I will do everything I can to make sure we survive and rebuild River Valley Town." Bard's words comforted some, but they could not settle everyone. Many in Lake Town liked Bard. He was a far better leader than the rapacious former mayor, but liking him did not mean they could lightly entrust their futures to him. The fervor of his supporters might sweep some away for the moment, but if life in River Valley Town proved harsher than in Lake Town, seeds of resentment would sprout. Even if the dwarves retook the Lonely Mountain and drove off the orcs, that complaint might not disappear. Bard knew this. He had few options. After talking with Tarns, Gandalf, Thorin, and Dane, he understood Lake Town could not stand an orc assault. They could either rely on the old walls of River Valley Town or abandon the town, again as had happened a century ago, though this time Bard did not know where he could take everyone. The Woodland Realm might shelter them temporarily, but not indefinitely. If the dwarves could restore Lonely Mountain, perhaps River Valley Town could flourish again. Bard admitted he was taking a gamble, but there were few better choices. Thorin and Dane immediately stood with Bard to reassure the townspeople. The dwarves pledged to help rebuild River Valley Town and promised that if Lonely Mountain were reclaimed, a portion of its gold would be shared with Lake Town as a reward for their support. That promise finally put many minds at ease. Bard did not rush people to pack up and leave. Thorin and his companions still had to wait for Thrain's army to rendezvous in Lake Town. A few days later, Dane suggested sending scouts ahead. A squad of war goat knights should go to River Valley Town first to inspect it. No one wanted to move everyone, only to find goblins waiting at the ruins. Thorin agreed and asked Dane to include members of the Lonely Mountain expedition who knew River Valley Town well. Dane thought and chose Balin and Gloin. Balin was not only intimately familiar with the place, but also highly respected among the Iron Hills. The war goat knights would follow him willingly. Thorin had wanted Dwalin to go with Balin, but Dwalin insisted on remaining at Thorin's side, so Gloin went instead, primarily to watch Balin's back. At dawn, Balin led Gloin and the war goat knights along the frost-crusted track to the ruins. A leaden morning light lay over River Valley Town. Broken human statues slumped in nettle-choked squares, their hollow sockets staring at startled birds rising beneath the war goat's hooves. Gloin spat into the cold wind. Even rats wouldn't live in this cursed place, he muttered. Balin, with his usual affable smile, agreed. You're right. Let's see whether the walls are still sound, then we'll head back. The inspection revealed the walls were largely intact. Some sections would need reinforcement, but the fortifications could still serve. As they prepared to leave, the war goats suddenly reared and snorted white steam. The ground gave a faint tremor. There came a scraping noise like fingernails on stone. From cellars, wells, and latrine pits around the town, goblins crawled out, dozens, then hundreds, covered in dust and slime, tusks streaked with blood. They moved like a driven herd, tearing through rotten doors, yanking lizards from crevices and chewing them noisily. Balin hauled in his reins. Retreat to the cliffs outside the town, he barked. The war goats launched up broken tavern walls, leaping across roofs with ease, then bounded to the cliffs above the ruins. Tiles shattered beneath their feet as goblins poured out in a dark tide. From the safety of the mountain lip, Balin and his small band looked down with cold foreboding. Thousands of goblins now roamed the fields and ruins, spreading like rot. Worse, some of the goblins had split off and were moving northeast toward Ravenhill. Their tracks scored the snow in black, twisting lines. Balin swallowed and said gravely, "We must return at once. Tell Thorin and Dane what we saw." When Balin and Gloin reported to Thorin, Dane, and Bard, the tent fell silent. Balin added, "These goblins look like the ones from the Misty Mountains. We killed their leader there. Azog must have found out and sent these enraged mobs." Dane slammed his fist onto the wooden table, tipping over an ale mug. "No place will be spared," he growled. "Even River Valley Town, by Azog, the worm wants to fill every hole with his filth." Bard shot him a look that said more than words. Dane cleared his throat and moved on. "Ravenhill overlooks the eastern foothills of the Lonely Mountain," he said. "If the goblin sees it, Azog will see all our maneuvers." Bard's voice tightened. "What can we do?" Gandalf, who had just arrived, had only lit his pipe. He puffed, watching smoke coil up and fade, then tapped out the ashes. "We cannot let Ravenhill fall. It would be disastrous." He rose. Bard asked where he was going. Gandalf replied without looking back, "To find Tarns. He may have a way to deal with goblins at River Valley Town and Ravenhill." Tarns had been away for days, hastening earlier to return a soul collector to Golden Tree territory. Bernal, Millicent, and Egon had gone with him. Bard said quickly, "I'll come with you. I want to ask a favor myself." Gandalf paused and gave Bard a meaningful look. "Wait until he returns with me. Some of a wizard's methods are not for outsiders to see." He did not wish to reveal Tarnis's long-distance portals until the war around the Lonely Mountains settled. At dusk, Gandalf returned with Tarns. Not only Tarns, but Bernal, Millicent, Egon, and an entire fiery red force. As twilight gilded the silhouette of the Lonely Mountain, ripples ran across Lake Town's waters. The pier trembled. Fishermen looked up from their nets, puzzled. The Red Lion soldiers marched first. Armor like flames, synchronized steps, long swords and shields embossed with lion crests. Lion guards followed, mounted on red war horses, their manes braided, red cloaks embroidered with golden lions fluttering behind them. War goat knights in the same colors flanked them. The people of Lake Town gathered in the streets, stunned and excited. Children darted between legs pointing at the red line of soldiers. The dwarves tightened their grips on weapons at the sight. The Red Lion Legion radiated a palpable threat. Relief washed over them as they recognized Tarns, Bernal, and Gandalf among the ranks. Thorin, Dane, and Bard hurried over. Thorin's eyes widened. "I thought the Storm Legion of Stormvale was Tarns' finest force," he said. "But this is something else." Dane's awe broke into a booming laugh. "If we can't take the Lonely Mountain with this army at our backs, I'll be ashamed to live." Tarn has wasted no time. "I heard about River Valley Town and Ravenhill from Gandalf," he said. "I brought the Red Lion Legion from Golden Tree Territory. It's one of the best siege forces in my lands. General Radon commands them, but he is still on his way. He'll arrive in a few days. Once he's here, we should strike at River Valley Town together. Bard, your people should come as a special detachment to guard against surprises." Dane frowned. "But Ravenhill, what shall we do about Ravenhill?" Tarn smiled slightly and shrugged. "Leave Ravenhill to Radon. He'll lead a company of Red Lions himself and take it." Chapter 131, Arrival. Tarns's words startled Dane. He glanced instinctively at Thorin, asking with his eyes if the young prince knew General Radon. Thorin shook his head. He knew Nefeli Lu, Bernal, Rogier, and even Dee, but he had never heard of anyone called Radon. Could this be a countryman of Tarn's newly arrived in Middle-earth? Thorin wondered, giving Dane a look that said he didn't know. Dane caught the look, cleared his throat, and voiced his concern plainly. "Tarns, anyone who can lead a legion must be a brave commander, but there are still thousands of goblins in Ravenhill. I'm uneasy relying on your general and a few Red Lion knights alone." A boisterous female voice and the sound of hurried footsteps answered. Dane and the others turned to see a broad-shouldered woman in a helmet, a long-bearded old man, and a towering warrior in Red Lion colors approaching. Freya, Oga, and Jerian. When Radon was absent, these three commanded the Red Lion Legion under Tarns's orders. Their bearing showed they were seasoned fighters. Thorin's eyes flicked as he asked, "Tarnis, who are they?" Tarnis stepped forward and introduced them. "The one who just spoke is Freya, Radon's personal guard. That's Jerian, the lord of Radon's city. And that's Oga. He has been at Radon's side for many years." Freya plopped down, took off her helmet, and revealed a plain, rugged face. She caught the room's attention and waved them off. "Humph, why are you staring? Don't expect me to do any thinking. Tell me where to fight, who to fight, and how to fight, and I'll do it." Oga was similar in manner, but kept the Red Lion's discipline. He nodded to Dane and the others and stood behind Freya and Jerian. Jerian walked up to Tarnas and the assembled leaders. "General Radon isn't here," he said. "He left me in charge. Lord Tarnas has briefed me. Do you have a detailed map of River Valley Town? Where is it easiest to break in?" Thorin stepped onto a stool and spread the simple map Balin had drawn across the table. The map had been meant to mark parts of River Valley Town needing repair for future defenses. Now it served instead as a plan for attack. Thorin pointed to two spots Balin had circled in blue. "One is the original gate toward the Lonely Mountain, which Smaug destroyed. The other is this stretch of wall," he said, pausing to glance at Bard. "That section was built by men and is much more damaged than the walls the dwarves helped build. It won't stand up to a lot of shaking." Jerian asked, "Do you know anything about the enemy's defenses?" Thorin shook his head. "They're goblins. They don't have formal defenses. They swarm. If I show myself, they'll run out of the town to chase me." Bard, who had been quiet, spoke up. "There are too many of them, and they're small. Balin said they burrow into wells and houses. The real problem won't be how to attack River Valley Town, but how to clear every last goblin out afterward." Dane agreed. "Bard's right. I don't want to be fighting Azog, and then have a goblin pop out of a latrine behind me to slap me with a rock." Jerian chuckled. "To root out those things that hide in the shadows? The Red Lion Legion is expert at that. Once River Valley Town is taken, I guarantee there won't be a single living goblin left hiding there." Freya and Oga smiled confidently. Thorin, curious, asked, What's your method? Oga replied, blunt and sure. Fire. Fire? Bard repeated, alarmed. That could burn down the whole town. Tarnas was quick to reassure him. Don't worry. In my homeland, the foes the Red Lion face are particular. Every man among them knows how to use fire. They won't let the town burn with a single great blaze. Freya scoffed. Those goblins are little more than pests. Thorin considered this. So we wait for my father's army, and this General Radon Tarns mentioned, and then we move on Azog. Dane snorted. Azog has already declared war on us. It's time we gave him a good punch. Thorin grinned. River Valley Town and Ravenhill are Lonely Mountain's fangs. Let's break Azog's teeth. Gandalf, who had listened in silence, finally spoke. We shouldn't simply wait in Lake Town for Thrain and Radon to arrive. Azog may have baited them toward the Lonely Mountain. If those goblins make for Lake Town instead, that could be trouble. Dane frowned. What's so troublesome about goblins coming here? We're not afraid of them. Jerian understood Gandalf's meaning and explained, Lord Tarns's friend likely suggests Azog wants the goblins, and us to fight first. In his view, the goblins aren't true soldiers, but cannon fodder meant to exhaust and tie down our forces. I'll take a small patrol outside the town, Thorin volunteered. If goblins are spotted, I'll lead them away to a safer distance and then return. Bard frowned. That could be dangerous for you. Thorin was calm. It's my duty. Tarns cleared his throat. Aegon will go with Thorin to protect him. Aegon killed the Goblin King. Those goblins remember his face. He'll be more likely to draw their attention. Thorin's eyebrow rose. Why hadn't that been said sooner? But he swallowed his pride. He'd already volunteered. He couldn't back out. Fortunately, the goblins seemed to believe Azog's orders and remained in the ruins and in Ravenhill, not moving elsewhere. The rats and insects of River Valley Town and Ravenhill had been nearly devoured by the goblins. If Tarns and the others had known, they could have simply sat in Lake Town and let the invaders starve themselves out. 3 days later at dawn, as the fishermen were just starting their day, an unheard whistling came from the sky. They turned, not expecting to be surprised again, yet their eyes widened in astonishment. War machines, battering rams, siege towers, catapults, ballistae, flew toward Lake Town, moved through the air by powerful magic. At the front, a broad man hovered with his arms crossed. That was Radon. He rode no mount but floated, wrapped in a shimmering purple gravity aura, and the machines trailed behind, as if they were islands of war dragged through the sky. The battering rams wore iron horns, the siege ladders gleamed, catapult stones arced through the air, ballista bolts flashed in the light. Everyone, men, dwarves, and hobbits, gaped. Thorin, Gandalf, and the others stood among the crowd, stunned. Bilbo, bemused, broke the silence. The little hobbit squinted up and scratched his head. This is grander than anything back in the Shire. If I'd known fighting involved flying, I'd have swapped my bacon toast for ginger biscuits. His joke pulled some of the crowd out of shock. As if on cue, Radon loosened his hold on the gravity magic. The 1,000-ton machines dropped suddenly. Women screamed and clutched their children. The dwarves ducked for cover. Then, 3 yards above the ground, the machines stopped as a rippling purple aura softened them into a gentle hover. Don't worry, these are our allies. General Radon of the Golden Tree. He has come to slay Smaug, Bard called from the docks, calming the townsfolk. Radon descended with the machines and landed outside Lake Town. The Red Lion soldiers moved quickly to secure the war gear and prepare it for use. He's like a mini giant, Dane muttered as the floating general came to a halt. From the ground, the dwarves, Thorin among them, craned their necks. Hey, big fellow, how are we supposed to speak face-to-face with you? Tarns introduced him properly. This is Ironfoot Dane, king of the Iron Hills. Radon nodded, arms folded, the purple light flickering. In response to Dane's complaint, he sent a gentle pulse of gravity. The dwarves, Thorin, and Bilbo were lifted so they could look him in the eye. Chairs and a table rose afterward, forming a little suspended audience. Thorin and Bilbo sat as if it were the most ordinary thing. That will do, King of the Iron Hills, Radon said. Dane patted the air chair in admiration. Just call me Dane, he said. Tarns, amused, asked, There's no need to lift Gandalf and me too, is there? We can see you fine. Gandalf laughed. I rather like it. It's not every day one floats. Tarns rolled his eyes, then gave a concise report of the situation. Radon listened calmly. I understand, he said. We must take River Valley Town and Ravenhill first. He raised his voice to his commanders. Oga, Freya, lead a unit with me to Ravenhill and take it. Jerian, lead the rest of the Red Lion Legion under Tarns's orders to take River Valley Town. Yes, the commanders answered. Chapter 132, Ravenhill. Thorin blinked when Radon gave the order so decisively and saw Oga and Freya head straight for the Red Lion encampment. Are we leaving already? He asked in surprise. Radon turned to the dwarf, incredulous. I've arrived, and the enemy occupies a key position. If we don't move now, should we wait for that Azog to strengthen his defenses? Thorin hurriedly shook his head. Not that. It's just, my father Thryne and his army haven't reached us yet. We plan to wait until both your forces were assembled before attacking Azog. That would have been ideal, Radon said coolly. But plans can't account for every variable, especially goblins. If Ravenhill truly overlooks the whole battlefield, as you say, we cannot allow the enemy to hold it. Imagine Thryne's army crossing the Misty Mountains only to be exposed under Ravenhill's guns. What would Azog do then? Thorin fell silent. Dane clapped him on the shoulder with a laugh. He's right, Thorin. Speed matters. Before those goblins burrow into every sewer of River Valley Town, we must take Ravenhill. Thorin nodded. All right, you've convinced me. A commotion from outside Lake Town interrupted them. Gloin came running, breathless, staring up in amazement at how Thorin and the others had taken to the air. Thorin, another group of War Goat Knights has arrived. Their leader is a dwarf lord who once refused you. He says he's here on Thryne's orders to support Dane. Thorin and Dane exchanged looks. Thorin called out, Perfect timing. Let him rest for an hour, then he'll join us when we attack River Valley Town. Radon rode his favorite horse across the cold wasteland, each hoofall sending out dark, purple gravitational ripples. 100-strong detachment of the Red Lion Legion followed in tight formation, armor clinking in unison. As they drew closer to Ravenhill, with Oga and Freya at his side, the cliffs loomed through the mist. The path steepened, and the land grew bleaker. Goblins had turned the abandoned fortress into a stinking den, watchtowers hung with animal hides and bones, the air thick with urine. The narrow approach was barricaded with skulls and packed with rotting entrails. Flies drummed like war drums. In days of feasting, defecating, and filth, the goblins had destroyed Ravenhill's ecology. Goblins crawled through the fortress walkways and up the mountain. Tunnels and pits speckled the slope, and a green tide wriggled along the path. If given more time, they would make the interior a labyrinth. Clearly, Azog had no intent to feed them. He meant them as cannon fodder. Radon paused, hovering slightly above the ground, and looked down. Oga, Freya, prepare for battle. They answered in unison. Freya glanced at Oga and said in a relaxed tone, The first shot is yours. Oga nodded. His heavy boots crushed the snow. He unslung a great bow taller than a dwarf and drew it to its full span, letting out a roar as the gravity-charged string thrummed. The arrowheads braided with a violet vortex tore the air into a spiral. A rain of gravity arrows fell like a waterfall toward the path. The first shaft collapsed into a black void when it hit the rock. Goblins nearby were ripped from the ground, their green bodies exploding into spray of gore. The second arrow punched through crude fences and wedged into a cave. Gravitational ripples peeled the cliff away like brittle biscuit and buried the goblins inside alive. When survivors scurried from a side tunnel, Oga's last arrow bound them to the earth and imprinted them into bloody bas-relief. Oga cleared the approach. Freya, with a greatsword only a size smaller than Radon's and trimmed with a lion's mane motif, raised her arm and shouted to the Latan soldiers behind her, Scions of the Red Lion, crush their spines with your boots, cleanse their filth with fire. Let these earth-magots know who rules Ravenhill. 100 boots stamped in reply. Brass shields were raised, and the Latans surged forward behind Freya. She trampled the bodies Oga had made, using her own mass and sword to smash into the fortress. Goblins issued piercing chirps from tunnels and ledges, brandishing rusty knives and short bows aimed at the joints in her armor. Freya roared, no less powerful than Oga's, and slammed her sword into the path, carving a gouge. Spinning on her blade, she cleaved several charging goblins in two, struck the ground again, then swept in another arc to cut down more. The goblins hoped to overwhelm her mid-spin and stab her in the unarmored gaps, but Freya's blade bore an unknown strength. She spun, slashed twice in midair, and cut down the attackers. Oga's arrow whistled again. Though he no longer unleashed a gravity arrow torrent, the shaft still carried violet magic that staggered goblin archers. It finally pierced one and pinned its head to the rock. Freya single-handedly breached the narrow path and reached the wider fortress platform, where the goblins packed the area in even greater numbers, their pockmarked bodies exuding a suffocating stench. She raised her sword and, with a single sweep, cut down 5 goblins blocking the entrance. The Latan flowed out behind her. Front ranks bore straight swords and brass shields, forming a moving shield wall. In triangular formations, they opened gaps for spearmen to thrust through. Oga covered the rear on the path, bow and crossbow spitting precise shots in support. On the platform, the grayish-green tide was driven back by the red-clad soldiers. Goblin numbers thinned under disciplined pressure. When the shield-bearers and spearmen reached the platform, and the first line replaced by towering tower shields, they pushed forward, spiked sides facing the enemy while spears stabbed through the gaps to tear the goblins apart. Panic swelled among the goblins. They screamed and called kin from higher ledges to overwhelm the formation by sheer numbers. Oga watched coldly from behind and issued a single order: "Prepare the firepots." "Red Lion firepots ready," a soldier shouted. "Stop," Freya ordered. The front ranks halted. The goblins, thinking the soldiers scared, leapt forward only to see burning porcelain pots arcing over the shields and smashing into their ranks. The pots burst, spewing sticky, corrosive flames that ate through cloth and sizzled flesh. One goblin smacked at a burning shoulder and watched its arm blacken and shrivel in heartbeats. The blast knocked down enemies within 5 paces, while prepared Latan held firm. The spilled flames smeared the stone like molten tar. Fleeing goblins who stepped into it were stripped of flesh by blistering heat, bones gleaming with grease. The stench of burning flesh and charred gore filled the air. The firepots did not annihilate Ravenhill's goblins, but the sight of comrades immolated turned fear into rout. "Advance," Freya ordered. The shield wall pushed aside charred corpses and pressed on toward Ravenhill's summit. The goblins scrambled up interlinked passages where traps had been set, hoping ambushes would nullify the humans' flame weapons. Freya took the right fork into the fortress interior. Oga led his men down the left toward a half-ruined arrow tower. Their ambushes failed. Face to face, discipline and power turned the ruins into a slaughter. When the last 300 goblins retreated into the fortress ruins, Radon, who had been observing, finally drew his star-scourged greatsword. The blade's tip barely touched the void, and the direction of gravity across Ravenhill flipped 180 degrees. Freya and Oga were shielded by the general's precise gravity wards. The goblins were not. They fell from vertical walls and smashed into the restored gravitational field, exploding into gore when they hit. Radon sheathed his sword with a metallic note that marked the massacre's end. At noon, Oga planted the golden tree banner into the shattered watchtower, and Freya set Radon's red lion banner beside it. Oga looked at Freya and said shortly, "Tell those dwarves every stone of Ravenhill was forged in the red lion's fire." Freya watched Radon reshape the battered terrain with gravity, then turned and said, "Not just that, let the world remember today, General Radon's and the Red Lion's first battle." Chapter 133, Capture of the River Valley Town Ruins. Before the smoke from Ravenhill had even cleared, the Red Lion Legion's war horns had already turned toward the River Valley town. While Radon and his forces assaulted Ravenhill, Tarns and his commanders, Geryon and the main body of the Red Lion Legion, had drawn up not far from the ruined outskirts of River Valley town, accompanied by Thorin and Dane's dwarf host and Bard's Lake Town guard. Tarns had left the Storm Legion behind in Lake Town as a precaution. Bard had taken out roughly half his guards, and Lake Town's defenses could not be left exposed. Who knew whether orcs might suddenly strike from elsewhere? Only Millicent accompanied Tarns here. Bernal and Egon stayed behind. Bernal was busy staving off the Storm Legion's eagerness to join the attack, while Egon meditated on Lake Town's tallest bell tower, just in case Smaug should suddenly fly out from the lonely mountain. Geryon approached Tarns. "Tarnished, Lord Tarns, he said respectfully, for the assault on the River Valley ruins, I ask that you and Lady Millicent do not engage directly. Oversee from the rear. The Red Lion Legion will bring the Golden Tree's name to the field for you and General Radon. Tarns paused, then nodded. Of course. Millicent followed his lead and consented. Thorin came forward with a map and the scout's report. The widest breach is on the west wall, but the goblins have blocked the passage with rubble, he reported. So Tarns, you will make a demonstration at the south gate to draw their attention. Dane and I will lead the dwarves through the west breach. A feint? Gerian's laugh was a dry rasp. The Red Lion never feigns. Thorin and Dane took their dwarves and moved to the west, while Gerian remained on a knoll south of the ruins, watching the goblin-infested wreckage. At the gap in the wall, heaped rubble and rotten timber formed a crude barricade. Gray-green bodies flickered behind it. The goblins stank of filth, yellowed fangs dripping mucus. Their short blades hung ready at their waists, reflecting coldly in the dull light. The sight of the Red Lion Legion had made them restless as hornets. Gerian raised a withered finger, pointed at the broken south gate, and barked, "Load the fire oil. Adjust the arcs." 10 catapults groaned as their winches were cranked, chains and gears grinding like a great beast's teeth. Clay jars of crimson grease sloshed in canvas slings, the Red Lion Legion's secret fire oil, the same blend once used to resist the scarlet rot. Sparks leapt from flint as the igniters kissed oil-soaked hemp, fuses hissing to life. Fire! The ropes snapped. 10 earthen pots tore through the air, tails of red flames streaking like falling stars. The first struck the gap in the wall, exploding with a thunderous crack that shattered the ruin's silence. A wave of crimson fire leapt into the cracks, burrowing down into hidden cellars. Screams erupted from below as burning limbs clawed through holes and were cut down by the third jars. The dry well in the square became a furnace. Flames licked down its walls, roasting the goblins trapped in its depths to blackened husks. Thick, acrid smoke rose, turning the sky over the ruins a sour gray yellow. The goblins did not flee so much as rage. When they saw 2 all too familiar human faces at the head of the Red Lion Legion, men who had been present when the dwarves had once broken into their underground halls and who had helped kill their king, the panic turned to fury. "Avenge the king," they howled. A gray-green tide surged through the breach. Burns and hatred had driven them insane. Rusty blades flew in desperate arcs. "Balliste, triple shot," Gerian ordered. He had no need for mercy. 20 ballistae twanged at once. Heavy quarrels, thick as arms, screamed from their strings and drove through the front ranks, pinning goblins together on the scorched earth like meat on skewers. Where the first volley smashed into them, second and third volleys targeted gaps in the charge, shredding their formations. Limbs and entrails lay in a bloody carpet, but more goblins mounted the corpses, eyes blank with murder. "Shield wall forward," Gerian thundered. The Red Lion front line roared as tower shields slammed together, forging an iron wall. Spear points glimmered between shields like a field of teeth. Goblins struck at the metal, sparks flew, then spear tips found throats. Men in the rear heaved up Red Lion flame pots and hurled them into the oncoming tide. When the pots burst, the charge disintegrated. Through the choking smoke, the Red Lion boots pressed forward over embers. The green flood could not stop the crimson advance. Battering rams. 5 ironclad rams pushed out, borne by the troll knights. Winches strained, chains screamed, and iron cones crashed into the barricade. Rotting wood and stone shattered. The goblins behind were crushed before they could raise their knives. As the rams bore down, 3 colossal shapes ripped from the legion's ranks. Lion guards, silver-maned and black-bodied, roared like distant thunder and became a blur as they charged. They did not need the rams to breach the wall. With a surge of muscle, the first lion guard leapt onto the battlements, claws raking stone, cleaver blades strapped to its forelegs, arcing in a lethal crescent. 4 goblins atop the wall were sliced clean in 2 with brick and all. The second cleared the inner wall and swept across the square like a silver gale, turning clustered goblins into fountains of gore. The third crashed into the goblin tower by the gate, its bulk toppling the centuries' weakened base. Rotten beams and severed limbs rained among the bricks. The scattered survivors' short bows were suddenly useless. The roar of the Goblin King's guard, one who had once parleyed with Azog, was cut short as the first lion guard snapped its spine, and the second cleaved down those who had tried to surround it. One lion guard leapt onto a tavern roof and, using the momentum of its descent, scythed 7 or 8 goblins off the beams beneath their feet, severed limbs and organs scattered like harvested straw. The third rose, reared back, and let out a dissatisfied roar, as his fellows had already wiped out most of the nearby ambushers. The rest were being hunted down by other lion guards. When the battering ram finally cleared the gate, the Red Lion Knights, long prepared, reined, and their horses leapt over the crumbling threshold. Clad in crimson, spears like a bristling forest, they crashed into the plaza. Iron-shod hooves smashed anyone in their path. The goblins' frenzy broke beneath the iron tide. 3 to a team, clear street by street, leave no survivors. Under Gerian's command, the knights flowed in dozens of crimson wedges, interweaving and shattering into triangles that swept the streets. Spears lifted goblin bodies high, horses trampled any who tried to run. A roadside cellar cover caved under an iron hoof and a spear found the curled figure inside. A would-be rallying guard met a bolt through the throat from a mounted marksman. Latan's soldiers streamed in behind the cavalry, fire and sword driving goblins from crumbling walls. Short crossbows pinned them to mold-stained timbers. Flame pots were thrown into every dry well. Goblins roasted and fell into the wells like burnt shrimp. On the west, the dwarves had met an equally vicious attack. The goblins' hatred for the dwarves, who had been present when their king died, made them especially brutal. As the dwarven formation formed, a seemingly endless horde poured through the western breach. The dwarf shields clanged down, tower shields planted like rock, and a living hedge of iron and wood met the charge. Spears flashed through the gaps. Snow and dust flew as Dane laughed and swung his warhammer, crushing a leaping goblin into paste. Black blood spattered his pauldrons. "Who? These lads have more spirit than at our drunken feasts," he roared, teasing Thorin. "They won't be using your bones as teething toys, will they?" Thorin, axe in hand, stomped and sent a frost out in a cold ring that froze the nearest attackers. The frozen figures shattered under dwarf swords. He didn't want to trade barbs with Dane on the field, but shouted back, "Mind your hammer, Dane." The dwarves held like bedrock. Feely and Killy, masters of the beast prayers, led hundreds of war-goat knights in a flank charge. Under their cover, the dwarf brothers cast Beast Claw, widening the west breach along the wall's cracks until the army could pour through. Goblin corpses rose into a slope before the dwarf shield wall, but still the line did not budge. Dane smashed a skull, pointed to the new opening, and bellowed, "Sons of Durin, give these ugly brutes a proper dwarven welcome." At midday, the town fell still. On the charred walls, 2 banners rose through the smoke together, the Golden Tree and the Red Lion. Gerian stood with one foot on a scorched goblin head, sweeping the field with a cold, assessing eye. Men prodded through piles of bodies with spear tips to make sure none green skins were feigning death. The dwarves mirrored the search, checking dark corners and cellars. Bard and the Lake Town Guard, who had waited behind expecting to help, watched the operation with wide, grudging respect, then, under Bard's command, joined the cleanup. Together, the Red Lion Legion, the dwarves, and the Lake Town Guard hunted down and dragged out the remaining goblins hiding in the ruins. Tarns walked through the streets and could not help but admire the Red Lion Legion's efficiency. Though their enemy had been only goblins and the town an almost deserted ruin, their coordination and decisiveness were something he had never seen even in the lands between. Gerian returned to Tarns and bowed. "I have not failed in my duty, tarnished, Lord Tarns." Tarns smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. "You've done well, Gerian. If Tarns is still a mouthful, you can call me Tarnished as before." Then Tarns turned, his gaze sliding toward the lonely mountain, as if trying to pierce stone itself. "We can't relax yet, Gerian. The goblins were only skirmishers. The real war is only just beginning." Chapter 134, Bard's Post-War Care, Heavy Fog. At the sewer entrance on the west side of River Valley Town, 2 soldiers of the Red Lion Legion pried up a rusted grate with iron hooks. A sickly stench hit them, goblin feces and the rot of dead rats. From the darkness below, countless small eyes glinted, waiting. Anyone who dared to enter would be dragged under by goblins clinging to their legs. But the Legion had fought the Scarlet Rot's kin for years. They knew these tricks and had a grimly efficient routine for rooting them out. It had cost many brave men to learn it. "Prepare the lamp oil," the leading Red Lion Knight ordered. He wrapped hemp rope, soaked in oil, around an arrow and nodded. From underground came a rustle. Then 3 goblins burst from the hole, shrieking, short bows raised and aiming poisoned arrows at the soldiers' faces. The arrows thunked harmlessly against the knight's heavy shield and clattered to the charred street, where a soldier stamped them flat. Then flaming arrows hissed into the tunnels. Fire licked through the maze of passages, and more than 20 goblins were forced out into the open. Some staggered, smoking and clutching their burning comrades as makeshift shields. Others feigned death, ready to leap up and bite ankles. "Advance the finishing squad," came the calm command. 10 Red Lion soldiers, each armed with a war pick, swept along the blackened lane like a comb. The picks shattered skulls precisely, whether the body was an unburned goblin, a charred corpse, or one pretending to be dead. In the central square, they found many others, slain by blades. The men checked them one by one. A false corpse sprang up and was immediately struck down by waiting crossbowmen. River Valley Town's old trade with the Dwarves had left many houses with cellar entrances. Those cellars had become treacherous traps. When the soldiers forced open a goblin-sealed door, they found more than a dozen gaunt creatures tearing at roasted remains. These were the lowest ranks of the goblin underground, slaves who had never eaten enough. Days of hunger had turned them to cannibalism. When they smelled meat, they fed without shame. The sight made the knight's jaw tighten. "Burn them clean," he ordered. A firepot was hurled, and flames roared up behind them. The Legion went through every dry well, privy, and sewer in town, burning and smoking out hidden pockets until every hiding place was cleared. The fire and thick smoke drove the goblins into the open, and the soldiers finished them one by one. Bard emerged from a cleared street, black with soot, coughing. He walked toward Tarns and said, "You were right. These soldiers know how to use fire, perhaps a little too well." Thorin, who had been standing nearby, shrugged. "Fire has its uses. It cooks, it forges, and it burns our enemies." Tarns looked at him oddly. "We'll need about another day to finish cleaning River Valley Town. 100 years of neglect leaves too many corners for goblins to hide. Use the time to have the people of Lake Town pack up and move here." Bard blinked. "What about Lake Town itself? Should we destroy the houses? It feels like a waste to simply abandon them." "When did I say to abandon Lake Town?" Tarns asked, puzzled. Bard hesitated, thinking. Tarns had not said to abandon it. He had only recommended relocating the townspeople to avoid more orc raids. Thorin stepped in to explain. "Once we dwarves take back the Lonely Mountain, the region will recover. River Valley Town alone won't meet your future needs. You can build a road between Lake Town and River Valley Town, or develop both into a single larger center. The more prosperous your human towns, the better for the Lonely Mountain." So that was the plan. Tarns had meant the houses should be kept, not destroyed, perhaps used later as way stations. Bard understood and bowed. "I'll go back and bring the people over." By the time Bard returned to Lake Town and assembled everyone, it was noon the next day. The sun smelled faintly of unburned charcoal, and the lake gave off a dull, fishy tang. Bard stood on the broken pier and watched families load the last of their belongings onto carts. An old fisherman clutched his oar, eyes bloodshot and fixed on the water's reflection. Where once his face had lit at the thought of a 3-foot fish, now only scraps of ice drifted like dull duckweed. Bard went to him, laid a hand on the man's hunched shoulder, and said softly, "Uncle Tom, it's time." The old man's throat worked. Cloudy tears fell on his knuckles. "I know," he whispered, "but this is my boathouse and my father's nets." "We will come back," Bard promised, firm and steady, pressing the man's shoulder. Many found leaving harder than they had expected. A widow carefully set 2 small children in a cart. One 8-year-old bolted for the doorway, picked up a filthy cloth doll, and had to be tugged back by his mother. A blacksmith pushed a cart piled with tools, turning frequently to look at his forge as it receded. When Bard led the people into River Valley Town, the last wisps of black smoke from the clearing had just drifted away. Tarns stood by the breach in the wall, with Radon's broad frame beside him. Tarns waved Bard over. The goblins are cleared. The Red Lion Legion and the dwarves worked through the night and have readied a number of habitable buildings. Send your people to Thorin. Bard bowed deeply at the city gate. The people of Lake Town, no, River Valley Town, will remember this kindness. Radon nodded, his attention elsewhere. Before Tarns could say more, Gandalf came striding up, leaning on his staff and still picking ash from his pipe. His face was drawn and urgent. He did not greet Tarns, but went straight to Bard. Bilbo is missing, Gandalf said. Someone saw him fishing at the Lake Town dock this morning. Have you seen where he went? Chapter 135. Bewitched Bard stared at Gandalf for a moment, stunned by the question. He dug through his memory and answered, This morning I saw that hobbit fishing, looking bored, down at the dock. I showed him a few tricks, then went to help others in town. I haven't seen him since. Gandalf's face tightened with worry. So he disappeared after that. He wasn't in the inn when I left, and I just searched the Lake Town contingent for a long time without finding him. Where could Bilbo have gone? Tarns frowned at the news, then forced himself to relax. He spoke gently, trying to soothe Gandalf. Don't panic, Gandalf. Bernal and Egon are still in Lake Town, and the Storm Legion soldiers are there too. Bilbo will be fine. Hobbits are easily overlooked. Perhaps that's all this is. Gandalf exhaled, but did not look fully convinced. Saying it helps, but I'm still worried. Radon stepped forward. Tarnis, I'll take the Red Lion Legion and guard Ravenhill and River Valley Town. Go back and look for your friend without worry. Tarns nodded and met Gandalf's eyes. All right, we'll go back together. You check the dock. I'll ask Bernal if he found anything. Thorin, noticing the strained faces around Tarns, hurried over, learned of Bilbo's disappearance, and said, Count me in too. Bilbo signed the dwarves' contract, so I'll be responsible for his safety. He turned to Bard. About the houses in River Valley Town, speak with Dane. Then Thorin swung up onto a war-goat and followed Tarns and Gandalf toward Lake Town. But when they arrived, it wasn't Bernal who met them. It was Egon. Tarnis had just dismounted his spirit steed, Tourette, when Egon's first words stunned him. Bernal is gone. Tarna's eyes widened. Bilbo's disappearance was bad enough, but Bernal missing felt like something else entirely. Before he could spin out worst-case scenarios, Egon drew a scrap of paper from his pocket and handed it over. Bernal left a note, he said. He wrote that Bilbo wasn't at the dock and he couldn't find him, so Bernal went to look for him. He told us not to worry. Tarns read the note and relaxed only when he recognized Bernal's handwriting. He told Gandalf what it said, then rolled his eyes at Egon. Don't stand there like that next time. You had me thinking something had happened to Bernal. That morning, Lake Town's dock flashed under a clear sky with a cold, iron-gray light. Bilbo Baggins sat on the edge of the water-soaked pier, a fishing rod across his lap and the line dipping into the glassy lake. The sleeves of his coat bore ash from last night's pipe, and the wriggling earthworms in a clay pot at his feet had long since frozen stiff, just like his enthusiasm. He'd cast the first line 3 hours before and felt no better. Maybe blueberry jam would work as bait, he muttered, tugging at an empty line and glancing toward the town entrance. The sound of carts grinding over gravel drifted back, and Bard's hoarse voice called out, Let the women and children get on the carts first. Wrap the moisture-sensitive furniture with tarpaulins. Bilbo's fingertips found the golden ring in his pocket. The metal grew subtly warm beneath his skin, and something like a whisper slid into his bones. They won a battle and are busy with other things. Thorin is thinking about dividing the mountain's gold. Dane worries over his fallen men. Even Gandalf and Tarns are busy with the dragon. Who would care about a hobbit who can't catch a fish? Suddenly the rod dipped. Got one. Bilbo jumped up so quickly his boots slipped on the icy boards. He hauled and strained and pulled up only half a broken, rusted sword tangled in weeds, an orc's discarded blade. He slumped on the bench, frustrated. Oh, blast! The ring's voice was clearer still. What are you doing in River Valley Town? Playing the fool at the dwarves' feast? Or being seen as a burden by the Red Lion? Bilbo seemed not to hear the voice. He cast his hook again into the cold water. By noon, the great bustle of Lake Town's migration had calmed. Bilbo nibbled the last piece of honey cake from his pocket and realized the dock was nearly empty. In the distance, the Storm Legion soldiers were changing guard, Their iron boots clanked with a steady clock-like rhythm. Had everyone already left? Gandalf? Mr. Bard, he called, voice swallowed by the wind. Only a raven answered, gliding over the lake with a fresh fish clamped in its beak. It cocked its head at the hobbit, who had not caught so much as a minnow all morning, then wheeled north toward Ravenhill. Bilbo's fingers closed around the ring again. The metal gleamed, and the whisper resumed, warm as honey. They don't need you here anymore, but Rivendell never forgets its guests. Let those brave warriors guard their glory. By the time they're pouring celebratory wine under the golden tree, you'll already be warming your toes by Elrond's hearth. Yes, Rivendell. The word floated in his head like a promise. He rose dazed and started trudging north along the icy shore, not noticing that his path would lead him into Mirkwood. At first there were only a few silver strands among the branches, like cobwebs spun from morning mist, brushing his curly hair. But the farther he walked, the thicker the silk became. Great swathes of spider-webbed trees closed around him. His hand, still on the ring, recoiled as a prickle of dread ran through him. Just spider silk, he muttered. Trying to steady himself, he turned to go back, but the path was already woven shut with sticky silk. His hand slid from the ring to the brass short blade at his waist. The hilt felt warm and steady, and a faint golden light winked from the blade. Above, a rustling sounded, and long shadows fell across the forest floor. The ring in his pocket flared hot. Put me on, and those eight-legged monsters won't smell your fear. The thought of using the ring to become invisible and slip by made his thumb move toward it. But as if something reached into his mind, Tarns's voice flashed across him, sharp, like a cold shock, and the faint light on the blade guttered out. 6 calf-sized spiders dropped from the treetops, their chelicerae dripping a fluorescent green venom that steamed as it hit the leaves. Bilbo bolted, but his outer coat snagged on a tree trunk with thick silk. He drew his blade and cut himself free. He scrambled into a hollowed tree. Peering up, he saw the inside walls hung with dense, cocooned shapes that rose and fell with his breathing. He pressed himself against the wood and covered his mouth to choke down any noise. Outside, the spiders clicked and rubbed their jaws, a slow, hungry rhythm. Dessert. Fresh dessert. Bilbo's fingers fumbled for the ring. It slid into his palm as if eager, and a vision flashed. A feast. Tarns and Gandalf lifting wines. Thorin's laughter like knives. The spider's shadows swallowed the light at the hollow's mouth. The ring hissed with seductive sweetness. Put me on, and you can glide elegantly past them, or stay here and become a breeding ground for larvae. Bilbo's thumb stilled on the ring, but this time he did not raise it to his mouth. He shoved the ring deeper into a more private inner pocket. To hell with your breeding grounds, he muttered, surprising himself with the ferocity in his voice. He pulled out the tinderbox he had used for his pipe the night before, struck it, and hurled the burning sparks at the nearest cocoons. The dry spider silk caught instantly, and the hollow lit up in a sudden flare. The spiders screamed and backed away from the flame. Seizing the moment, Bilbo rushed from the tree and ran for his life. The fire spread, and the spiders scattered into the trees, shrieking. The cold wind on the dock lifted fine snow as Bernal strode out across the icy planks. He'd come to fetch the hobbit, who always ducked into corners. Tarns liked to tease Bilbo as the Hobbiton gourmet, and planned to chide him gently before lifting him onto his warhorse to join Bard and the others. But the dock was empty. Only a half-frozen earthworm dangled from a hook. He called, "Bilbo?" The voice died in the wind. Bernal frowned and found a small, wide footprint pressed into the snow, distinctly hobbit-sized. He followed the trail. The prints grew erratic where it passed through reeds. Scratches on the ice showed Bilbo had stumbled. A crumb of honey cake with bite marks lay beside a broken branch. Bernal chuckled despite himself. Even running, he doesn't forget his snacks. He truly is a hobbit. The footprints led north. At their end loomed the dark edge of Mirkwood. Tarnies, your friend is going to be trouble yet. Chapter 136, Bewitching Failure. The rotting leaves of Mirkwood squelched under Bilbo's feet. 5 spiders the size of calves had him backed into a hollow at the base of an ancient tree. Their chelicerae opened and closed, spitting venom that ate the bark into a honeycombed pattern. Come on, the Shire never had stew with 8 legs like you. If the other hobbits saw you, they'd definitely make stew of you. Bilbo brandished his brass short blade, bluffing, and the tip nicked the lower jaw of the first spider to lunge. The next moment, another Chelicera struck his hand, and the brass blade flew from his fingers, clattering into the roots. "Gah! Catch him!" a spider hissed. One of the spiders leaped and knocked him down. Bilbo kicked with all his strength, sending it rolling away, and found an elven short knife, a silvery blade, in his hand. "Tarniz didn't just give me one dagger," he muttered with a shaky smugness, waving it at the fallen spider. Then he noticed more of the great spiders closing in. "Of course, he didn't expect me to fight beasts this size," he joked to hide his nerves, twisting to fend them off. The spiders didn't flinch. The canopy shifted, and a rain of sticky silk glued his left leg to the ground. 3 spiders attacked at once. He raised Sting to block, but another blow ripped it from his grip. A strand of silk wrapped his wrist. A spider clamped his waist in its chelicerae and swung him into a tree trunk. Bilbo's head struck a knot, his vision clouded with blood. He glimpsed the elven dagger stuck in the mud, but his right hand was too weak to reach it. Spider cries filled his ears, sticky silk layered his chest, and a foul stench clogged his mouth and nose. With what strength remained, Bilbo bent his knees and kicked the spider's abdomen. A roar answered him. Bernal's silver shape cut through vines like lightning. His greatsword swept in a storm of motion. 3 invisible slashes fanned outward. The front 3 spiders were instantly torn apart, and before their fluorescent green blood hit the ground, the sword's point had pierced the skull of a 4th. The remaining spiders raised their chelicerae in anger. Bernal spun, used a tree for leverage, and launched himself like an arrow. Clang! His blade wedged precisely into a chelicera joint. He twisted. The thick carapace split with a crack. With the spider screaming, Bernal drove the sword down and ripped a 5-foot gash along its chest and belly. As the creature's entrails spilled across the rotten leaves, Bernal's boot pressed on its dying body, and he leaped toward Bilbo. He wore his faint smile, but his voice was colder than iron. "You dare touch Tarniz's friend? I don't want to imagine how furious he'd be." The other 5 spiders shrank back, their compound eyes reflecting his silvery armor. Bernal hurried to check Bilbo. Only half of the hobbit's pale face was visible through the silk cocoon. Dark red blood had beaded and congealed on the threads from a wound in his forehead. "Bilbo?" Bernal called. No answer. Poison? His pupils narrowed. He lashed out with the flat of his sword and smashed the head of a nearby spider. The spray of gore startled another. He spun, cutting silk as it tried to creep up again, and slammed the pommel into the mouthparts of the last attacker. When he stopped, the spider corpses lay in a radial pattern around Bilbo, each cleanly killed by a single, precise strike. Bernal knelt, found Bilbo still breathing, and breathed out in relief. He used the tip of his sword to pry the cocoon apart. Bilbo's mucus-matted lashes fluttered. Bernal relaxed a fraction and drew from his waist pouch a small red bottle of holy dew. "If you're awake, open your mouth and drink this." Bilbo cracked his lips and Bernal tipped the liquid in. "Cough, cough!" The blessing in the dew poured warmth through him, restoring strength and closing wounds. The hobbit, who had been weak a moment before, sat up brightened. When he could see Bernal clearly, he visibly relaxed. "Mr. Bernal." "Shh!" Bernal put a finger to his lips and listened. A faint tapping came from above and around them, spider legs on trunks. Bilbo looked ashamed. Bernal patted his shoulder. "Tell me everything on the way back to Lake Town. Tarns must be worried." Before he finished, Bernal threw the greatsword backward. Above them, a large spider that had crept close, using the trees as cover, was impaled through the head and collapsed, its legs convulsing grotesquely as it fell. "Take your weapon and stay near me," Bernal said curtly. He could clear the spiders, but couldn't guarantee Bilbo'd be safe without caution. Bilbo scrambled to retrieve the elven short blade from the mud, nodding. "Run!" More spiders, alerted by the commotion, hurried through the trees. As the nearest spider closed, several sharp whistles cut the air, and an arrow thudded into its compound eye. "Get down!" A clear female voice rang out. Bernal dropped low instinctively as a rain of arrows clipped his armor. Several spiders descending from the canopy were pinned to trunks, white fletching still trembling. Toriel dropped from a tree, 2 arrows knocked but not yet loosed. Legolas swept the clearing like a gale. He ran on the webs, each footfall unleashing another arrow. By the time he landed beside Bernal, 3 arrows had pierced 3 beating spider hearts. He brushed a strand of web from his shoulder. Sunlight fragmented in his gold hair, turning the recent slaughter into something almost balletic. He signaled the elves around him, who had their bows aimed at Bernal. "Put away your weapons." Bernal shielded Bilbo, watching the elves appear from nowhere. "Mirkwood's welcome has become unique. Have elves taken to stealing other people's kills?" he said to Legolas and Toriel. "Stealing?" Toriel kicked a spider corpse with a raised eyebrow. "These little monsters should have been cleaned up days ago. My unit has been tracking them for some time. Just as we were about to act, the hobbit drew them out and spoiled our encirclement." Bilbo's eyes widened. "So you saw me a long time ago and just watched me get chased by those big spiders?" Legolas looked at him coolly. "Watched? You don't know how many you alarmed by running about. Why do you think you lasted so long? If Toriel and her squad hadn't been nearby, you'd have been swamped." Bernal held up a hand. "Enough arguing. Why reveal yourselves now?" Toriel exchanged a glance with Legolas. "Because I came looking for you to give a warning. A friendly warning." "What warning?" Bernal asked. Toriel pointed to the spider corpses. "About these creatures. They are disappearing from Mirkwood, little by little. These are nearly all that are left." Bernal hummed. "Isn't that good for the woodland realm? Your king said spiders troubled you. If they're vanishing, why warn me?" Bilbo's ears pricked at the word she did not say. He peered from behind Bernal and asked Toriel, "You said disappearing, not being eradicated, right?" Toriel smiled kindly at him, then turned to Bernal. "It seems your hobbit understood the warning before you did." Prompted, Bernal frowned. "Where are they disappearing to?" Legolas answered for her. "We've been tracking these spiders the past few days. Toriel said these are what's left." Bernal glanced behind, toward the edge of the forest and the direction of Lake Town. He smiled. "Interesting. They aren't staying in the wood. They're moving toward inhabited places. Thank you for the information. If you ever come to the Golden Tree's territory, drinks are on me." He hesitated. "Elves can drink, yes?" Legolas blinked and nodded. Bernal seemed pleased. He patted Bilbo's shoulder. "Come on, let's go." But Bilbo froze. "Wait, Mr. Bernal. Tarns gave me a dagger and I've lost it. I have to find it." He checked his pockets out of habit and felt nothing. Cold sweat soaked his collar. The ring he'd put away was gone. Bilbo's face changed. "And I've lost something very important. I must find them." To Bilbo's surprise, Bernal simply reached into the leaves and produced the brass dagger and the gold ring in his palm. "Important things? Are you looking for these?" Bilbo stared, mouth hanging open. Bernal handed them over gently. "Hold your weapon tighter next time and wear clothes with sealable pockets so important things don't fall out." Bilbo took the dagger and the ring. When Bernal said important things, Bilbo's gaze flicked to the dagger, then back to the ring. "Bilbo?" Bernal prompted at the blank look. Bilbo snapped out of it and slid both away. "Thank you, Mr. Bernal. Where did you find them?" Bernal shrugged. "They fell together. Besides you, I can't think of anyone who'd carry a dagger and a ring into Mirkwood." Bilbo put the ring back in his pocket. This time it was cool again. He thanked Bernal once more. Bernal said, "No need to repeat it." "Oh, Bilbo, about that ring. It seems to have some magic. It wouldn't stop talking in my head when I picked it up. I've seen some odd things, so what it said amused me. But since you value it, you should let Tarns inspect it. He's good with enchanted items and making them safe." Relief flooded Bilbo, and he nodded quickly. Of course. I'll tell him. Though isn't he busy planning an attack on the Lonely Mountain with Thorin?" Toriel cut in, looking at Bernal. "I think you need someone who knows these spiders well." Bernal looked at her. "You want to come back to Lake Town with us? I don't think these spiders are much of a threat. A well-trained storm soldier can take one." Toriel shook her head. "That's exactly why they're dangerous. They don't confront foes head-on. They lurk in the dark until their prey grows tired. You can't expect your soldiers to stay utterly vigilant all the time, can you?" Legolas, listening, stepped close and whispered, "Are you mad, Toriel? Father will throw you in a dungeon if he knows." "He's always wanted to do that," she said without turning. "I'd rather deal with the spiders than wait to be locked up." Legolas drew a breath. "Then I will go too." Toriel shot him a look of disbelief. Bernal watched the two elves in amused stalemate and grinned. Then I'll welcome you both on behalf of Tarns. Chapter 137. It's not over yet. After Legolas had organized the elven squad, Toriel had brought, he fell into step behind Bernal and Bilbo, following them closely. Are you crazy? I can't imagine how heartbroken Lord Thranduil will be, Toriel said, staring at the obstinate elf. Legolas only grew more nonchalant. Him? Heartbroken? No, he doesn't care about his son. He only cares about how many cups of wine were drunk, how much meat was eaten, and whether the music at tonight's banquet was off-key. Toriel opened her mouth to retort, but Bernal cut in. I don't mean to interrupt, but I see Tarns and the others coming. Best not to argue in front of him. Tarnas is my liege. Guests should show basic respect in his presence. Legolas's eyes met Toriel's as if to ask, do you want the prince of the woodland realm to lose his manners before a human lord? Toriel sighed, turned away, and let the matter drop. When Tarnas, Thorin, and Gandalf saw Bernal and his group at the edge of Mirkwood, Tarns immediately rode Torty over, dismounted, and hurriedly checked Bilbo. Are you hurt anywhere? What's with the cobwebs on you? Poisoned? He asked, anxiety thick in his voice. Thorin watched with the same tense, concerned expression, silent but alert. A wave of guilt washed over Bilbo. Only moments earlier he had been convinced Tarns and Thorin didn't care about him. I'm fine. Thank you, both of you, he said, stumbling for words as he tried to explain why he'd gone off alone. He had so much to say he didn't know where to begin. Tarns only visibly relaxed when Bernal confirmed that Bilbo had drunk from the red dew vial. He pulled the hobbit into a warm embrace. I'm glad you're all right, he said. When Tarnas released him, Gandalf stepped forward with a chuckle and a conspiratorial wink. It seems our hobbit knows, in his heart, that someone truly cares for him. Gandalf had spent the last few days with Bilbo and had noticed his restlessness. He regretted not speaking more with him. Perhaps then Bilbo would never have wandered off over such a small thing. Thorin, understanding the hint, promised, when we return, I'll have Bofur and Bombur stay with you until you enter the Lonely Mountain and see the Durin banner flying upon its walls. Bilbo felt foolish. He mumbled awkwardly to Tarnas, Gandalf, and Thorin, I'm sorry. I made you worry. I promise there won't be a third time. Thorin blinked in surprise. Wait, this isn't the first time you've snuck off on your own? Tarns and Gandalf exchanged a look. Tarnas shrugged, and Gandalf smiled. Let's just say it's a small secret between Bilbo, me, and Gandalf, Tarnas said. We have to give him some privacy. Thorin sighed, then turned his attention to the two elves standing quietly behind Bernal. So what's the situation with these two? Did they kidnap Bilbo? Legolas had been about to retort, but remembering Tarns's presence and the earlier exchange with Toriel, he held his tongue. He smiled at Tarnas instead. Toriel and I came on behalf of the Woodland Realm to aid the Lord of the Golden Tree. When a friend of the Golden Tree is in danger, the elves do not stand aside. We'll discuss it properly back at Lake Town, Tarns said. This isn't the place. Not long after, Tarnas and his group returned to Lake Town. Bernal resumed the town patrol, taking over from Egon. Gandalf decided to hear Legolas and Toriel's account before arranging for Bilbo to travel on to River Valley Town. By the fire in a stone house, Toriel repeated to Tarns what she had already told Bernal. Tarns considered the report. Spiders, he said quietly. Not too many, but if they keep prowling at night, there'll be trouble for the Storm Legion. Toriel traced the tabletop with her fingertips and nodded. They could come in through larger chimneys or even through the toilets. Houses here are built directly over the lake. People's privies open straight into the water. Those places make quiet entry points for creatures like these. You need to warn not only the Storm Legion, but the townsfolk as well. Tarns cleared his throat. You might not know this, but Bard, the former mayor of Lake Town, led everyone to relocate to River Valley Town. Perhaps we should call him Lord of River Valley Town now. Legolas suddenly understood. No wonder there were no ordinary residents in Lake Town when we arrived, only soldiers. Thorin, leaning against the hearth, sneered. So you elves have been blind to what's been happening at your own doorstep these last few days? Legolas raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Are you talking about how you trapped a host of orcs in Lake Town and killed them with fire and crossbows, or about how you wiped out the goblins from Ravenhill and River Valley Town yesterday. Thorin sat up straighter, cold-eyed. You didn't send anyone here. How would you know? Legolas's mouth curved in a faint smile. Humans aren't the only ones who pass messages. Birds and beasts are our friends. Maybe you're too short to have seen the ravens from Ravenhill flying toward Mirkwood. Thorin bristled. Oh, thank you for praising my height, but my eyes are fixed on my enemies and the ways to split their skulls with my axe. Legolas blinked, surprised by the misunderstanding. Thorin paused as well. Tarns, watching the bickering between elf and dwarf, cleared his throat to change the subject. So, Legolas, is King Thranduil the reason you're here? Tauriel looked away. Legolas's expression flickered with discomfort before he nodded. Yes, you once sent a gift to King Thranduil. When he learned of these spider signs, he sent me to investigate. Bilbo's mouth hung open, surprised. Legolas had not mentioned that while they argued in Mirkwood. He was about to say something when Legolas shot him a warning look, and Bilbo clamped his mouth shut. Tarns could tell Legolas's answer wasn't entirely sincere, so he didn't press it. When you return, please convey my thanks to King Thranduil. Legolas didn't want to linger. I'm going into Lake Town to get familiar with the layout, he said, and left with Tauriel. After they left, Gandalf tapped his pipe on the table, struck a spark, and blew a ring of smoke that by his control condensed into the shape of a Mirkwood crown in the air. He smiled, eyes narrowed. Thranduil might dispatch elves to help, but it's unlikely he'd send Legolas willingly. Thranduil dotes on his only son. He would give him everything. Legolas doesn't seem to understand that yet. Tarns gave a short, weary sigh. I don't need reminding. I could see Legolas and Thranduil are not close. But Legolas is still the only son of the king of the Woodland Realm. If anything happens to him here, it could easily spark a conflict between our lands. Gandalf considered the parchment Tarns unfurled on the table. What will you do? I'll write to Thranduil, Tarns said. I have to word it so the Woodland Realm will keep an eye on us. Gandalf grinned. If you want Thranduil's attention, add, Prince Legolas's safety shall be under the full supervision of Lady Tauriel. Fathers are always touchy about their sons' female companions. Elven fathers, no different from mortal ones. Tarns rolled his eyes but added the line as Gandalf suggested. Far to the east, Azog had returned to the lonely mountain. He strode across the dwarves' old floors, smirking as the clamorous voices of his orcs echoed through the empty halls. The dwarves' palace had been converted into a fortress, and a foul stench hung in the place. Beyond a massive gate, however, the sound of angry orc voices fell away. Past that gate lay the old treasury, mountains of gold and silver and jewels once kept in dwarf hands, but now Smaug's lair. Occasionally, the soft clink of sliding coins echoed from within. A burly orc crept forward from a shadow. My lord, the dragon has been sleeping for days. His snoring is very loud, he reported. Azog entered. The moment his foot touched a gold coin, Smaug's eyelids snapped open. Seeing who it was, the dragon's gaze hardened into an arrogant sneer. Look who it is, Smaug grumbled. A self-important wretch. You thought the dwarves would fall to your schemes, but you failed. Azog froze, then stared up at the behemoth. What? Smaug's contemptuous laughter filled the chamber. You are even more foolish than I expected, Azog. Your gutter brats couldn't even disrupt those humans' afternoon tea. Did you think taming trolls meant taming mountains? Bolg's shattered bones are laughing at the bottom of Lake Town. Azog reeled, then fled Smaug's lair and sent out scouts to Lake Town, Ravenhill, and the ruins of River Valley Town. None returned. Realization boiled into fury. His son Bolg and the goblins he'd raised had been cut down by humans and dwarves. Fool, he spat. Whether at himself or his son, it was hard to tell. We cannot let Thrain's army join with the dwarves of River Valley Town. We must annihilate those dwarves and make the son of Durin cover every inch of the lonely mountain. With that roar, the orc war drums began to beat, dull and insistent. Deep beneath the mountain, the tremors summoned by the drums stirred enormous earthworms from their fissures. Their mouthparts tore at rock as they writhed, making miniature earthquakes with each heave. Under Azog's command, they began to burrow a passage, the main route from the Misty Mountains to the Lonely Mountain, for the not just Thrain's army, Azog snarled. Ravenhill must submit to me or be destroyed. As the drumbeat changed, Two of the earthworms turned and writhed toward Ravenhill. Oga, kneeling at a hastily erected lookout on the edge of the ruined town, felt the faint rhythmic tremors through the cold stone beneath his palm. The subtle grinding was like a giant beast gnawing at the mountain. Oga, a Red Lion Knight under General Radon's command, had 100 men with him. Reports from Azog's scouts had been cut down by Oga's arrows, and now the mountain itself seemed to be moving. He stood, face grave. Light the beacon. Tell the general, war has begun. Chapter 138, Written Request for Leave. Leave Request. Today, I organized the detailed outline. There are still roughly 25,000 to 36,000 characters remaining to conclude the Lonely Mountain arc. Chapter 134, Invasion. The war has begun. Radon hovered with his arms folded, a mountain of a man suspended in the air. He lowered his head and said to Freya, "Sound the horn and have the people of Lake Town take shelter. Send someone to Tarns. Tell him what's happening here." Freya saluted deeply and left. Jerian watched her go, then spoke to Radon in a casual tone. "Lord Radon, it played out exactly as you predicted. That orc commander Azog had the earthworms tunnel up under Ravenhill. That's the target he chose." Radon's voice was steady. "Azog had little choice after Ravenhill fell to us. My judgment came from reading the enemy's intelligence. Tarns' dwarf allies were ambushed by earthworms, proof that Azog can launch underground assaults. Ravenhill sits at a key point. If I were in Azog's place, I'd either send troops to retake it or simply level it." Jerian nodded thoughtfully, but River Valley Town was taken too. If Azog isn't a fool, he'll realize just how powerful the force that wiped out so many goblins is. If he sends troops to assault Ravenhill, he'll take heavy losses even if he wins. So wiping the open fortress off the map and forcing both sides to start from scratch becomes his next viable option. And the earthworms the dwarves described have precisely that capability, so it's not hard to guess what Azog will do when he learns Ravenhill has been captured. "What if Azog thinks the same?" Jerian added, curious, "and has the earthworms tunnel under River Valley Town instead? He could strike there." Radon's lips curled in contempt. "That's exactly what I want. I hope Azog remembers that tunnels dug by earthworms aren't one way. That's why I didn't pull Oga's men back. I kept them at Ravenhill. If we intend to get that sleeping dragon inside the Lonely Mountain to return the favor, we must go pay a proper visit and deliver him a grand gift." Beneath Ravenhill, the earth began to shudder more violently. At first, dust sifted from crevices like the last grains through an hourglass. Then the mountain groaned, and deep fissures tore open, as if split by an invisible axe. The black, plated backs of the earthworms flashed in the breaks, their carapaces grinding against rock and sparking like scattered embers. Ravenhill's fortress became the hollowed shell of a giant. Battlements collapsed, mortar and stone cascaded into yawning chasms as the earthworms' tunneling shook the very foundations. An upper watchtower toppled, smashing against the cliff with a dying roar. A wet, gnawing sound rose from below as a massive, slime-smeared maw burst through the surface. Its fangs sank into the fortress base, and the granite shattered like brittle biscuits. Entire sections slid into the valley. Beams screamed and splintered, like rusty knives dragged over stone. A yellow-gray tide of dust and smoke engulfed everything. Sunlight was reduced to murky threads slicing the haze. The two earthworms hissed and burped contentedly, wriggling back into the Lonely Mountain. Their exit set off a secondary collapse. Huge rocks rolled down, twisting the terrain into a new, treacherous maze. Only when the beasts had gone and the dust thinned did a troop of red-clad soldiers emerge from a less damaged ridge nearby. Oga stared at the ruined Ravenhill, eyes narrowed. Even as loose stones continued to tumble into the breach, he barked to his men, "Before those rocks seal the tunnel, clear the entrance. Then, as Lord Radon planned, we'll storm the Lonely Mountain and pry that dragon out of its lair." Lonely Mountain Palace, lower level. The tunnel the earthworms had bored was pitch black and stank of rot. Oga moved at the head of his unit, hunched. The shaft rose at an angle. A fetid draft wafted inward where the earthworm's huge body had only just passed. The orc unit that had been tasked with tending the earthworms had left in the assault on Thrain, leaving only a few bored orcs to look after the beasts. Whenever the earthworms went out, those orcs relaxed. Their slovenly, distracted posture drew Oga's attention. The clink of armor from Oga and the Latan soldiers behind him was drowned by the distant scraping from other tunnels, which kept the orc sentries unalert to the presence of an enemy beneath their feet. There were 5 orc guards in the passage. Oga marked each position with a glance, raised a finger, and gave a small signal. 10 Latan soldiers with hand crossbows peeled off from the main 100-man squad and melted into the darkness. In a whisper of winding strings, 10 bolts loosed and sliced through the tunnel air. The bolts struck true, 2 bolts in the head or throat of each orc, dropping them with no more than a rattle. Silence swallowed their bodies. Oga's team moved into the hall beyond. Sconces threw weak, jittering light over a scene of ruin. Dwarf skeletons, long dead and scattered by orcs, lay in heaps. The soldiers picked their way to avoid crunching on bones, not out of piety alone, but to keep their approach noiseless. Oga signaled, and they ascended a broad stone staircase in single file. When he cautiously pushed open the wooden door at the top, the smell that hit him was all too familiar: sweat and rank orc odor, and a chorus of snoring. Some orcs who had not yet fallen asleep blinked drowsily and stared, their dull minds frozen a beat too long. Oga reacted first. He raised his hand, formed 2 quick gestures, and barked, "Clear this place." Chapter 140, The Wrath of Smaug. When the Latan soldiers once more found an orc's eye socket with a crossbow bolt, the Red Lion Legion's efficient, ruthless slaughter began in earnest. One orc, only just realizing the attack and groping for the short blade at its waist, had its head cleaved by Oga's greatsword. Skull fragments and brain matter splattered into the fire, sending up a foul black smoke. The chaos lasted less than 3 minutes. By the time the last orc was pinned to the rock wall by a spear, the resting room was a swamp of gore. The orc soldiers had never expected to be ambushed inside the lonely mountain. Unprepared, they were no match for the Red Lion Legion. Oga stepped over glistening organs and walked toward another exit. The stone doorframe was carved with faint dwarvish runes. Any dwarf, Thorin and his kin included, would have read them as Durin forever bright. Heavy footsteps came from beyond the door, mixed with the creak of other stone doors sliding open and the shrill chatter of orcs. "Check for injuries," Oga ordered. "Those lightly wounded, stay. The heavily wounded, take back the way we came. The rest of you, follow me and continue upward." Only 3 Latan men volunteered that they were wounded. 2 had cuts along their arms. The third had a badly injured ankle from being set upon by multiple orcs. They had bandaged themselves and used antidote moss to counter the toxins on Orcish blades, but they still bled under the gauze and moved stiffly. The ankled soldier, knowing he would slow the unit and endanger his comrades, handed over his Red Lion flame flask, hand crossbow, and bolts to the nearest men without complaint. The other 2 did the same. Then they supported the injured man and retreated the way they had come. The sound of commotion outside the stone door sharpened. Oga drew a Red Lion flame flask from his belt and spoke calmly. "Form ranks. Ready crossbows." They reformed in seconds. A slab of stone was shoved open from the other side, leaving a narrow gap. An orc peeked through and a crossbow bolt punched into its forehead, flipping it backward into the passage. The opening was only just wide enough for Oga to pitch his flame flask through. He braced his shoulder against the crack, sparks flying as metal scraped stone, holding the door from opening further. The flask arced out and landed just beyond the threshold. It detonated, and a tongue of scarlet fire shot through the crack. Screams and the smell of burnt flesh came through the door. One orc tried to beat the flames off its arms, but the viscous fire charred its hand and forearm into a blackened stump. While the flames still licked the passage, Oga wrenched the slab open. The crossbowmen, ready and steady, loosed dozens of bolts. Those orcs not already burned to death had smoke-darkened eyes when steel pierced skulls and necks, pinning twitching bodies to the rock. Where bolts did not reach, the shield wall closed ranks and pushed. 2 rows of tower shields formed an iron crescent, pressing forward. Spears thrust through gaps and ripped orcs apart. "Keep moving forward," Oga ordered, and the shield wall drove the last flailing orcs before them. In the throne room, Azog looked up from the Dwarven King's chair, his iron hook scraping the armrest, as a scout stumbled in and blurted, "Intruders on the lower level, humans." Azog sneered and rose, then sat back down with a slow, bored motion. Humans? Those rotting fishmongers from Lake Town? The scout shook his head in terror. No. Red armor, lions carved on their shields, their bolts. They fly like they have minds of their own. Azog's single eye narrowed. He kicked the scout aside. Useless filth. Those are the elites who struck Ravenhill and River Valley. You couldn't even tell. The scout scrambled to his knees and crawled away, trembling, too afraid to finish. Azog's mouth twisted. The earth tunnels the earthworm had burrowed were not only for his orcs to use. He had intended to unleash his Olog trolls to crush any human invaders underground. But he paused. No, perhaps these intruders could be useful. The dragon cannot take all the spoils without paying some price. Azog looked towards Smaug's horde, and the dragon coiled above it, a cold smile on his lips. Send men, he ordered. Bring our guests to the dragon's sleeping chamber. As they pushed deeper, Oga and his men noticed a pattern. When they tried to move in a certain direction, a large contingent of orcs would rush out ahead as if funneling them, while another corridor had few orcs at all. It felt deliberate, like being guided. After Oga split an orc in two, he glanced back at one that had lagged, watching to see if the Red Lion Legion pursued. It did not speak, but its expression was a sneer. Where in the lonely mountain are you leading us, Azog? Oga thought. One of the soldiers behind him whispered, Lord Oga, these orcs. Oga cut him off with a raised hand. Lord Radon was right. Continue as we planned. Follow them. Yes, sir. Smaug, coiled atop his mountain of gold with eyes closed, had noticed the invasion but dismissed it. Orcs and humans squabbling under the mountain were trifles. Had dwarves come, he might have roused properly. But as the clamor drew closer to his lair, annoyance crept in. He rose from the coins, eyes glittering with predatory amusement. Azog, he purred, do you think I do not know what you are about? The orcs shoved open the door to the dwarven treasury and charged in. Not long after, Oga and the Latan soldiers followed. Jewels and coins climbed to the vaulted ceiling. Smaug's dark, coiled form lay glinting atop them like a living statue. The sheer, concentrated wealth of the dwarves stunned Oga and his men for a heartbeat, even those hardened by many campaigns. The orcs who had lured them in cringed and hid, terrified of being seen by the dragon. Oga signaled his squad to spread out. Clustering beneath a sleeping dragon would be suicide. The Latan soldiers climbed the glittering slopes, loaded hand crossbows, and took steady aim at Smaug. The dragon's voice rolled out like a cold tide, the words steeped in ancient magic. Kneel, speak your name, and I will grant you the honor of licking my dragon claws, Smaug mocked. The syllables of dragon speech were thick with power. Coins clattered and slid, and the sound felt honey-heavy in the air. Oga felt cold fingers at the base of his skull, a sluggishness in his thoughts. For a moment, he almost wanted to speak his name. He forced a scoffing smile under his helmet and gave the signal. The Latan crossbows cracked, bolts tearing through the air, but Smaug merely shifted, and the bolts skittered off black scales like pebbles off iron. Only Oga's gravity arrow, an arrow invested with weight magic, did any damage. It struck Smaug's chest and detonated into a purple vortex, cracking 3 scales the size of shields. That was enough. Smaug's vertical pupils slit to pinpricks, and his roar tossed the horde into a rolling sea of gold. The soldiers behind the shining pile were flung, scrambling to keep their footing. Oga drove his greatsword into a stone pillar to anchor himself and felt a coin clatter from his mouth as he roared. Second round, aim for the cracked scales. Smaug inhaled, and the air around him seemed to thin and crack. The first burst of flame was pale, almost white-hot, so fierce it liquefied coins and turned sapphires into blue smoke. The mountain of treasure under which the Red Lion Legion crouched began to melt. 2 Latan soldiers threw up their shields and leapt from cover to buy time. Their shields ran and dripped with metal, and within seconds the men were engulfed. Their bodies vanished into black powder where they stood, but their sacrifice gave the others the split second needed to dodge. The next sweep of flame was a darker red, and Smaug savored it. He let it roll low and slowly, a deliberate show for Oga. Watch how your men are consumed. The second stream happened to hit the very alcove where the hiding orcs crouched. Screams rose as they were turned into walking torches. Smaug had never intended to spare those who had disturbed his sleep. If not for his compact with the dark, he he might have roasted Azog's favored lieutenant as well. Seeing the slight distraction the dragon gave himself, Oga took another gamble. While Smaug's attention was pulled to the screaming orcs, Oga knocked 3 more gravity arrows, not at the dragon this time, but at the mountain of gold beneath Smaug's coils. The arrows burrowed into the pile and detonated the weight magic, destabilizing the horde. A sinkhole opened, the dragon slid, losing purchase on his glittering perch. Smaug had not flown in over 100 years. For a stunned moment, he forgot to spread his wings. Oga seized the chance. "Fall back the way we came," he shouted. They ran. As the last Red Lion soldier cleared the treasury passage, Smaug's fury poured out behind them. From the shaft came the intermittent shrieks of orcs, the palace shaking as the enraged dragon used every bound and breath to scour the tunnels. Oga heard the awful sounds. Those unlucky orcs were being used as targets for Smaug's wrath, and he knew they had to put as much distance between themselves and the dragon as quickly as possible.